So I thought it would be. I thought
After Carter had cut off virtually all
I
financial
was
assistance to Paraguay,
I thought she started
Reagan
campaigning.
reversed course 180 degrees. Reagan officials approved the largest bank loan that Paraguay had ever received, totaling $63.9
And that should be the thing. Once the election, this election ends, you should start your campaign for next year.
But despite this policy reversal, the Reagan administration
I don't know why you
did have
wouldn't.
something in common with Carter. Neither
Because
considered
it's a long
Paraguay
election cycle to keep up
particularly
with. I don't care if I fucking
Just
have my
like
eye
his
on fucking governor in
predecessors,
Georgia.
Reagan
Stacey
believed that
Abrams
it
said
would
I
take
fucking
much
lost
to
it.
keep
Fucking
Paraguay in
2020.
line. He knew that when push came to shove, Stroessner, for all his bluster, would capitulate to U.S. demands, as he had during the situations with Auguste Ricoeur and Domingo Laino.
Naturally, the people who suffered most from this system of salutary permissiveness were the citizens within Paraguay, whose human rights took a backseat to a U.S. diplomatic experiment. But although Reagan showed little regard for human rights, his ambassadors to Paraguay were surprisingly among the greatest champions.
From 1982 to 1985, Arthur Davis served as Reagan's ambassador to Paraguay. He wasn't afraid to confront the despot personally when it came to authoritarian decrees. One of the prime examples came when he challenged Stroessner for closing one of Paraguay's few independent newspapers in 1983.
After learning of Stroessner's attack on the press, Davis canceled plans for a U.S. Army regiment's parachute team and musical division to participate in the government's Paraguayan Independence Parade.
When Stroessner learned of Davis's directive, he told Davis that it would wreck our friendship. To which Davis replied, "Well, you have hurt our friendship by closing the newspaper."
Davis's successor, Clyde Taylor, was just as aggressive in his dealings with Stroessner. In a fairly shocking and confrontational snub to Stroessner, Taylor met publicly with opposition leaders in 1986. Later, in an interview with the Washington Post, Taylor proclaimed, "The message that we're trying to convey about the need for a democratic solution to societal needs here is that only with public participation do you have a good possibility of avoiding the kind of destabilization that provides fertile ground for extremism, right or left."
To Stroessner, the legitimization of opposition parties was simply unacceptable. In response, Stroessner penned an op-ed in which he compared Taylor to Muammar Gaddafi. He wrote, "It's difficult to see a difference between Gaddafi, enemy of the United States, terrorist and destabilizer, and Clyde Taylor, whose activity brings us neither peace nor liberty nor democracy." Not only was the statement wildly inflammatory and inaccurate, it was a preview of even more dangerous events to come.
In January of 1987, the Paraguayan Interior Minister was quoted as saying that Taylor had better get out before the Colorado Party precinct leaders and the Colorado assault battalions declare him persona non grata.
A little over a month later, Taylor attended an event hosted by an opposition group called Women for Democracy, when the secret police responded by revoking Paraguay's favored nation status as a U.S. trading partner.
This was more of a symbolic gesture,
It's fun.
since the U.S. imported
I
almost
knew it was a
nothing
girl.
of value
Really?
from
And we get
Paraguay.
spraying each
But
other.
it did
It's
mark
just
a
it's a
turning
lot of
relationship between Reagan and Stroessner, one from which it never recovered.
However, it
when
was
the
an
dog goes all
institution
wet.
that dealt
Just
perhaps
soaked
the
by
most
the
serious blow to the Stroessner regime,
Yeah, is it fun though?
the Catholic Church.
For decades, the Church, a conservative and
Did you ever get
domineering
lucky, Beth?
institution in its own right, had tacitly supported Stroessner.
But not a lot.
By the
Why?
1980s, a new generation of Latin American priests had
My mom.
modernized Catholic dogma.
She gave
Human rights, especially those of the poor, became a primary concern. Inspired by this movement, the Church of Paraguay created the Paraguayan Episcopal Conference.
The aim of the organization was to educate and unify those across Paraguay who lacked opportunities in work and education, most of whom were victims of Stroessner's repression.
Throughout the 1980s, the conference's official newspaper attacked Stroessner on a regular basis. And in 1987, the group organized organized the largest and possibly most significant protest against the regime in the country's history.
The demonstration not only caught the attention of ordinary Paraguayans, but also the Pope himself, John Paul II. When he visited Paraguay in May 1988, he declared, "It will not be possible to speak of a true liberty, much less a democracy, where there does not exist the real participation of all citizens. Respect for human rights is not a political expediency, but rather a duty for all creatures of God."
It was a striking rebuke, and coupled with Reagan's rescinding of Paraguay's favored nation status, a clear message was being sent. The end was near for Alfredo Stroessner.
Though Reagan and the Pope offered harsh condemnations of Stroessner, these were more the result of a changing tide
Well, I
of
was gonna
public
say I like
opinion than any particular personal
Mr.
integrity.
Corn shit a lot
Throughout
better.
the 1980s,
Your shit's really good too.
authoritarian regimes across
Really?
the world were being crumbled by the people. Brazil, Argentina, Chile, and most significantly the Soviet Union all witnessed the end of dictatorships during the decade. These revolutions heralded a new spirit of independence and a renewed hatred for authoritarianism.
However, this spirit didn't quite extend to Paraguay. Instead, the revolutionary movement came from within Stroessner's own Colorado party. Even after 35 years, very little had changed in the broader scheme of Paraguayan politics.
By 1988, 72-year-old Alfredo Stroessner was no longer particularly active in Colorado party affairs, nor was he mentally present. By all accounts, his physical and mental abilities had declined severely. Because of this, talk of a successor had been brewing for some time.
In the late 1980s, a group of politicians from the party's most militant loyalist wing engineered a purge of so-called disloyal Colorado members. Then they tried to exert control over the military, firing dozens of high-level generals whom they perceived as a threat. Their plan was to make way for Stroessner's son, Gustavo, to take control of Paraguay when Stroessner eventually died.
Created a schism within the Colorado party between those loyal to Stroessner and the traditionalists who felt they were overstepping their roles. But rather than settling things diplomatically, the traditionalists did it the Paraguayan way, without much planning and shrouded in chaos.
On February 2nd, 1989, General Andres Rodriguez suddenly and without warning organized Stroessner's ousting. For years, Rodriguez had been Stroessner's closest confidant. But after Rodriguez refused a demotion, their relationship had become strained. And sensing weakness in his former ally, Rodriguez pounced.
Rodriguez ordered Stroessner to be arrested at the home of his then mistress. But Stroessner managed to escape to the offices of the Presidential Escort Regiment, the unit that had remained loyal to him. And after hours of fighting, in which nearly 300 soldiers were killed, on February 3rd, Stroessner finally surrendered.
2 days later, Stroessner flew to Brazil. For the next 17 years, he remained there quietly in exile. Finally, in 2006, the 93-year-old dropped dead of a heart attack.
But his brutal legacy lived on after his death. In 2016, details of his most sadistic actions finally confirmed some long-standing rumors.
What's this guy from?
Coming up, the ghosts of the past haunt 35 years of authoritarian rule.
Now, back to the story.
In 1972, British rocker Rod Stewart recorded the song Lost Paraguayos. Although the title might conjure up a song about the kidnapped victims of Alfredo Stroessner, the song was actually about the relationship between a man and a much younger girl, trivializing the notion of statutory rape.
Unbeknownst to Stewart, the song actually was a prescient, albeit entirely inappropriate, to something commonplace in
Iowa.
For decades, rumors ran through Paraguay that Stroessner's regime not only kidnapped political dissidents, but also targeted young girls for party officials' own sexual gratification.
But it wasn't until 2016, when the Paraguayan Ministry of Justice opened an official investigation, that the rumors were finally confirmed. Stroessner's government had operated a sex ring with underage girls. The ring operated virtually out in the open, ignored by those in power.
There's no exact date to suggest when the operation began, but contemporaneous accounts show it was in full effect during the Ford and Carter administrations of the mid to late 1970s. And although it's unclear how aware either president was of the conspiracy, the United States did, in fact, report on it.
In a 1977 Washington Post op-ed, the daughter of a prominent Paraguayan family recounted an incident in which she and her husband were invited to a mansion in a wealthy enclave of the capital city. Once there, they discovered three young girls who had clearly been the victims of sexual assault.
But after calling the police and attempting to report the crime, they were told that the owner of the house was operating under protection from a high-level military officer. As a result, the police couldn't intervene.
Only 2 years later, in 1979, prominent American sociologist Kathleen Berry published Female Sexual Slavery about the effects of human trafficking. She wrote, "The enslavement of girls and women in Paraguay can be traced to the corrupt military dictatorship of Alfredo Stroessner. Before his coup, there was only one brothel in all of Asunción."
The trafficking itself even had a very sinister nickname among Paraguayans, Little Red Riding Hood. Not only was it a nod to the fairy tale, but also referenced the red Chevrolet Custom 10 truck that prowled the country.
According to Paraguayan educator Gilda Ferreira, who grew up just outside Asunción, rumors were rampant within her school about a red truck that would snatch young girls from the street. She even remembered hearing that the pretty ones had the most to fear.
In 2016, stories like the red Chevy were finally given their due.
I was kind of
According to
joking
the
about
Ministry
that. I
of
think
Justice's Rogelio Urbu, as many as 1,000 girls may have been groomed and then systematically raped during the dictatorship. They tended to be between the ages of 12 to 14 and from poor families in the
there are
countryside.
4 Hispanic
One
families
woman
or
actually recounted her
people. They
own
may not even know each
experience
other.
being kidnapped at age
Hey, man.
12. She was at home, playing in the yard with her 2
Are you
sisters,
Hispanic? No,
when a
I'm not. I'm
military
one of the
general
519
approached,
other people.
flanked by 2 soldiers.
You know who the
She
two?
recalls
No, we're
that,
all trying to
"My
find them
mother
too.
handed me
All the
over
Hispanic
without
people and
resistance.
the white people are
We
trying to
took me
find
to a
out
house,
it's
we got drunk,
what
and what had to happen, happened."
it
Worst of
turns
all,
out.
several people have come forward and confirmed that they witnessed Alfredo Stroessner himself visiting homes around Asunción where kidnapped children were held. Often he would simply drive there himself in his own car and park on the street, in full
Thank you,
view of anyone who happened to be present.
Even though Stroessner himself is gone, the scars of this practice still remain. According to a June 2020 Latin American News Dispatch article, the consequences of naturalizing sexual exploitation persist to this day. According to the General Department of Statistics and Censuses, almost 50,000 girls and boys in Paraguay live in conditions of criadajo,
Cool,
in
man.
which
I'm
parents give their children
What's
to
an onion
families of a
bagel?
higher economic status in
With
exchange for
butter and
education
peanut
and
butter?
food, make them do
Bill.
domestic labor.
What is
These
it?
children's confinement often leads to physical and
Over easy
sexual
egg and
abuse.
syrup? No.
It's easy and
With cream.
convenient to mock dictators as psychopathic megalomaniacs whose behavior is so ludicrous as to be
Marmalade.
almost comical, such as Jean Fidel Bocasa's quest to turn the Central African Republic into a personal empire.
Jam.
But the little we know about Stroessner, particularly the details that are still being revealed recently, are hardly a laughing matter.
And until the details of the sex trafficking ring began filtering out of Paraguay, Stroessner's legacy was defined by another equally dark and bizarre characteristic: providing asylum for escaped Nazis. A small colony of Nazi sympathizers had immigrated from Germany to Paraguay long before Stroessner took power. But after World War II, with Stroessner's approval, Paraguay provided asylum to one of the worst perpetrators of the Holocaust,
So that's not. You need to start making everything. All kinds of bread have to be.
Mengele became infamous for his sadistic human experiments. Mengele was so psychotic and devoid of emotion or
Oh my god, how am I
empathy
forgetting
that he would often whistle a cheerful tune during the experiments, one that could be faintly heard
Not
over the
marzipan.
screams of his
That
victims.
marzipan's big though.
Mengele only lived in Paraguay for a few years before moving to Brazil in the early 1960s. According to multiple eyewitnesses, his time in Paraguay was quiet. Apparently, he was quite popular and made little effort to hide his identity, living under the alias Jose Mengele. He was safe there under the protection of Alfredo Stroessner.
Harboring Mengele may have been an ideological exercise for Alfredo Stroessner, or it may have simply been another example of his disregard for human rights. If Stroessner himself adhered to the Nazi philosophy, it would perhaps be the only semblance of political ideology he ever held.
Since Stroessner
You
seemed to
haven't
lack
had Mazzona
any
in a long
coherent
time.
creed or principles
Really?
besides a desire to remain in power, his ability to do so in a country as politically fraught as Paraguay was nothing short of a miracle. Like other dictators who preceded him, Stroessner consolidated power by crushing his enemies, kidnapping and killing political dissidents, and creating a police state in which the military and secret police did his bidding. A natural introvert, the only way he seemed to connect with the public at large was by aggrandizing his own patriotism and military background.
In doing so, he created an image of himself as the ultimate Paraguayan, and characterized his enemies, or anyone who disagreed with him, as a traitor and an enemy to the country. Unfortunately, it's a tactic that's still, to this day, remarkably effective.
Stroessner's 35-year reign
It's
set
starting
Paraguay
out.
back
Cool,
decades.
man.
Despite the Itaipu Dam project, the country is among the poorest in Latin America today. Without economic partnerships and investment from wealthier nations, there's little opportunity for change.
The United States, of course, isn't immune to blame. From Eisenhower to Reagan, U.S. leaders saw Paraguay as small potatoes. Stroessner's dedication to eradicating communism essentially put him in America's back pocket, regardless of his human rights violations. The result was the disappearance of tens of thousands and an untold number of
Head out
deaths.
to
However,
restaurant
Paraguayans
style.
are nothing if
Oh
not
man,
resourceful.
yeah, definitely.
Under the guidance of a democratically elected government, the
Yeah,
overall
no,
quality of education and the
Nacho.
country's infrastructure are
Hell yeah, bro.
expanding at remarkable rates. The
Support
people are
consumers.
beginning to confront the country's dark past and create a brighter present in which survivors of Stroessner's abuse can finally have their voices heard.
I have to itch my fucking face.
Thanks for listening to Dictators. Next week, we begin our third season,
Who does
where we'll
penis
focus
and
on
penny
three infamous female dictators who reigned during the chaotic transitional period from the Middle Ages to the Renaissance.
You can find all episodes of Dictators and all other Parcast originals for free on Spotify.
Not only does Spotify already have all of your favorite music, but now Spotify is making it easy for you to enjoy all of your favorite Parcast originals like Dictators for free from your phone,
Like a pity
desktop,
candy bar,
or
that's what
smart
I was gonna
speaker.
To stream Dictators on Spotify, just open the app and type Dictators in the search bar.
And don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Parcast and Twitter at Parcast.
No one fucking likes
See you
payday
next time.
candy bars.
Dictators was created by Max Cutler and is a Parcast Studios original.
Like, who's left
It is
with me?
executive produced by Max Cutler, sound designed by Nick Johnson, with production
friend
assistance by Ron Shapiro, Carly Madden, and Travis Clark. This episode of Dictators was written by Tony Goodman, with writing assistance by Kate Gallagher, and stars Kate Leonard and Richard Rossberg.
In case you guys are wondering, this is what
Hi, listeners. If you love the podcast Dictators, don't forget to check out the new Spotify original from Parcast, Very Presidential with Ashley Flowers. Every Tuesday through the 2020 election, host Ashley Flowers shines a light on the darker side of the American presidency, exposing the most damning details surrounding history's most high-profile leaders. To hear more, follow Very Presidential with Ashley Flowers, free on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts.
Alright, are we done?
After the Roman Empire fell in the 400s, Europe plunged into the Dark Ages. Men from so-called barbarian tribes sought to control land and issue power.
What is that?
And in almost all of these cases, diplomacy was replaced by brutal violence.
Men were at the forefront of these battles. Women were expected to be seen, not heard. They were supposed to sew by the fire while their husbands made history, to be witnesses to others' greatness. Even when it came to royalty,
The wives of kings and lords had one job and one job only, to produce male heirs. In order to remain in power, the royal bloodline must continue.
however, that didn't mean every noble woman was content to be an heir-making bargaining chip. Some wanted power for themselves. From bloody wars to ruthless backroom dealings, these women
Yeah, look how
would do
fast he's
whatever
going.
it took to get ahead. They put aside their sewing nosy and picked up a lance. They betrayed their
Made him
closest advisors, stabbed loved ones in the back.
Many historians have labeled them as merciless, cruel, bloodthirsty.
In reality, these women were just as ambitious as their male counterparts. And if they had to crack a few skulls to get what they wanted, so be it.
Welcome to Dictators, the podcast original. I'm Richard.
And I'm Kate. On this show, we're going deep into the minds of some of history's most hated despots. Today, we begin our season on bloody female rulers in the Middle Ages and Renaissance. Isabella of France, Isabella of Castile, and Mary I of England. These three women refused to let the social norms of the era dictate their place in history. They craved power just like the men of their day and were willing to do whatever it took to grasp hold of it.
You can find all episodes of Dictators and all other podcast originals for free on Spotify. To stream Dictators for free on Spotify, just open the app and type Dictators in the search bar.
Today, we're exploring the life of Isabella of France, who was actually the Queen of England from 1308 to 1330. We'll examine her rocky partnership with King Edward II and see what drove her to rebel
They're
against
two
her
worlds
husband.
colliding.
Next week, we'll track
Why?
Isabella's rebellion
Because
and
she's
follow
right.
its chaotic and bloody aftermath as her rule drives England into chaos.
Coming up, we'll explore the rise of Isabella of France.
Which never has happened. But I was like,
They
okay,
say
that's
leaders
fine.
aren't
So,
born,
jump in the
they're
van,
made.
run up there.
But in medieval Europe, that wasn't the case.
I have to
Isabella of France had
Tony's
one
never gonna get
purpose in life:
to
be royalty. No matter how fit she was to be a leader, she was going to be one. And she was thrust into this role when she was only 4 years old.
In the 1290s, Isabella's father, King Philip IV of France, was entangled in conflict with his English counterpart, King Edward I. However, Edward's main focus was a different conflict, a heated war with Scotland.
At the time, Scotland was its own independent country.
This girl's fucking right. Like normally I'd be like this. Normally I'd be like this girl's such a bitch. Just the way she's coming at me, but I'm like, oh no, she makes a very valid point.
However, Scottish King John Balliol had other ideas.
The stones,
To
baby.
keep from being pulled in two directions at once, King Edward agreed to smooth
They had
things
like
over with
different
France by
sized
betrothing
hands,
his son, also named Edward,
which kind of
to
made it
King
cool,
Philip's
but
daughter,
it fucked it up.
Isabella.
I didn't like it because
Their
it didn't fit
engagement
this little girl thing.
solidified
It worked,
Anglo-French
but
relations and allowed King Edward to
stretch it
focus
out.
on Scotland.
Considering Isabella was only 4 when the betrothal was arranged in 1299, there was no rush for her and 15-year-old Prince Edward to wed, even if the union was only symbolic. But 8 years later, the state of affairs became much more urgent.
On July 7th, 1307, 68-year-old King Edward died on his way to wage a campaign against the King of Scotland. His 23-year-old son immediately succeeded him, officially becoming King Edward VII.
The new monarch inherited a kingdom in turmoil. The war with Scotland had emptied the royal treasury, and although relations with France were much more improved, there was still lingering tension between the two two countries over English-controlled land in France. Making matters worse, a decade earlier, Scotland and France had signed a mutual aid treaty. If they both attacked England at the same time, the English wouldn't stand a chance.
It was imperative for young Edward and Isabella's wedding to move forward at once. Betrothals could be called off at any moment, but once a couple was married, divorce was practically impossible thanks to the Catholic Church. With Isabella
You just called this woman a drunk.
peace with France would be much easier.
Tony.
The wedding was held on January 25th, 1308. 23-year-old King Edward II traveled across to France for the ceremony, which took place at the Notre Dame Church in the city of Bologna.
It's impossible to know how 12-year-old Isabella felt about the union, but it's safe to assume that she accepted the union as inevitable. At the time, getting married for the sake of love was a foreign concept, especially with royalty.
It's possible she was even excited for her wedding. She had literally spent her entire life preparing for this occasion. She most likely didn't remember a time when she wasn't betrothed to Edward.
It didn't hurt that Edward was quite a looker. According to contemporary chroniclers, he was a solid 6 feet tall and very handsome. He enjoyed physical labor and was described as one of the strongest men in his realm.
At present, however, their physical relationship was less important than their diplomatic one.
You have those pictures? Yeah, mine on a jumbotron.
But that didn't mean she wasn't capable of maneuvering her way around the
They added these two major times in front of thousands of people. I was on a jumbotron.
for Edward's family.
While he was in France for the wedding, Edward had to appoint a regent to take care of day-to-day matters back in England. The expectation was that he'd give the honor to one of his two half-brothers, keeping power in the family.
Apple butter.
Instead,
Why am I watching her die?
Earl of
I watched her wife, man.
Piers Gaveston.
In terms of rise, Gaveston didn't have much of a pedigree. But he and Edward were extremely close. Edward first met Gaveston in 1300 when he was 16. We don't know exactly why.
It's the
But in
worst.
1307,
My friend and I bought the worst beer ever, and it was like,
probably
this
because
is not Keystone. Really? Yeah. Oh,
Edward
what the fuck
was too close for comfort.
Many historians have speculated that Edward II and Piers Gaveston were lovers. Whether or not that's true, Gaveston, who was a few years older than Edward II, did have significant influence with his events. The moment Edward II ascended to his father's throne in 1307, he recalled Gaveston from exile and gave him the prestigious earldom of Cornwall. He also arranged Gaveston's marriage with Edward's niece, Margaret de Clare.
This unique influence was on full display the moment Edward returned to English soil with his new wife. When he and Isabella
Is that what happened with that fucking raccoon?
1308, Gaveston was there to greet them. According
Let's
to
get him
one
an Odyssey.
Edward was so
I don't know if
happy, he showered Gaveston with kisses.
Drive a
This
foreign car.
behavior may seem scandalous, but Edward's affection with Gaveston wasn't the problem. It was that
Why?
he didn't show the same
That's
affection to
that's the
other
seed number.
nobles
I
who
can
came
tell
to
you
see
that.
him.
And Edward's preference for Gaveston didn't just come at the other nobles' expense. Most importantly,
Oh, this bitch Moe's? Oh, hell yeah, girl.
And I could normally back it out, but the door's broken.
Edward and Isabella's official coronation was held on February 25th,
Tried to back
1308.
around,
Piers Gaveston played a significant role in the
so I can get out
proceedings.
that doorway.
He was in charge of carrying
not
the
right.
royal
Yeah,
crown and had the coveted role of
Yeah,
walking in
yeah.
front of Edward and Isabella.
Easy,
Instead
easy.
of wearing cloth of gold as befitting the nobility, Gaveston was draped in royal purple. One observer remarked that Gaveston was more splendidly dressed than the king.
and it didn't stop there. At the banquet following the coronation, Gaveston's coat of arms was displayed alongside Edward's, while Isabella's was nowhere to be found.
We don't know exactly how Isabella felt about this proverbial slap in the face, but even at 12 years old, the insult wouldn't have gone unnoticed. She was, after all, the daughter of a king.
In any case, Edward's nobles were plenty, even if it wasn't necessarily on Isabella's behalf. Shortly after the coronation, they demanded that King Edward banish Piers Gaveston once again for overstepping his place in the social hierarchy.
He refused. Instead of banishing Gaveston, Edward instructed his armies to prepare for war.
The military was Edward's only recourse against his own court. He knew that stripping the insolent nobles of their titles would largely go ignored. Only by force could he subdue them. The nobles demanding Gaveston's exile responded in kind. It seemed as though Isabella's reign as Queen of England might only last for a few months, all because King Edward refused to abandon Piers Gaveston.
The
Go to a
brewing
gulag
conflict
for
created
something
a
that I
sharp
fucking
divide
do
in Isabella's
all
family.
fucking time.
Her aunt Marguerite, who was the late King Edward I's widow, took the side of the anti-Gaveston nobles.
Isabella's father, King Philip IV of France, also refused to let Gaveston's insolence go unpunished. On May 14, 1308, Philip declared that anyone who took Piers Gaveston's side was his mortal enemy.
Perhaps sensing that his wife's loyalties were being tested, Edward awarded Isabella the revenues from Ponthieu, an English-ruled region in France. And he provided her with an independent household of nearly 200 people. This seems to have been enough to placate Isabella.
But even with her standing by his side, Edward was outnumbered. And in June 1308, he gave in and exiled Piers Gaveston to Ireland.
With Gaveston out of the picture, Isabella took on a more prominent role at court. Even at her young age, Edward allowed his wife to have a say in matters of state, including finances. And on August 16, 1308, the two of them jointly appointed a government official in Isabella's lands of Ponthieu.
Isabella's influence was evident in the historical record. Throughout 1308 and 1309, there were several legal pardons and financial grants awarded at the instance of Queen Isabella.
Edward regained his nobles' favor, and in exchange for giving them more influence at court, he convinced them to allow Piers Gaveston to return from exile.
This promise disappeared upon Gaveston's return. Rather than show humility, the restored Earl of Cornwall lorded his favored status over the other nobles. Gaveston was so petty, he even gave his counterparts belittling nicknames. For instance, he called Thomas, Earl of Lancaster, the Fiddler.
But Lancaster wasn't one to be trifled with. On top of being Edward's cousin and Isabella's uncle, he was the richest man in England. He especially didn't appreciate Piers Gaveston's insolence.
Lancaster was determined to rid England of Gaveston once and for all, even if it meant going up against his niece, Queen Isabella.
Is it more than one?
Coming up, Isabella rides to war against an unexpected enemy.
Dungeons and Dragons.
History, politics, true crime. The new Spotify original from Parcast has it all. Hi, it's Kate, and I'm thrilled to tell you about a timely new series called Very Presidential with Ashley Flowers. Every Tuesday through the 2020 election, host Ashley Flowers shines a light on the darker side of the American presidency. If you enjoy the deceits and dramas featured on dictators, you'll absolutely love what Very Presidential has in store. Exploits you never learned in history class, but probably should have. From torrid love affairs and contemptible corruption to shocking cover-ups, even murder, Ashley will expose the personal and professional controversies you may have never known existed. You'll hear some wildly true stories about presidents such as JFK, Thomas Jefferson, Teddy Roosevelt, and more. Family drama, personal vices, dirty secrets. These presidents may have run, but they most certainly can't hide. If you love the podcast Dictators, make sure and follow Very Presidential with Ashley Flowers free on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts.
Now, back to the story.
Around June of 1309, 14-year-old Isabella of France had to quietly endure the return of King Edward II's favorite nobleman, Piers Gaveston. However, not everyone in the English court was so accommodating.
In March 1310, Thomas of Lancaster, the richest man in England, and a coalition of nobles once again voiced their displeasure with Gaveston's undue influence over the king. Calling themselves the Lords Ordainer, they demanded to place reforms on Edward's household. If he refused, the Ordainers threatened to forcibly depose Edward.
As expected, the king refused to give in to their demands. Instead, he raised an army. But it wasn't to fight the Ordainers, it was for the still unsettled conflict with Scotland.
Even today, many world leaders use military conflict to paper over a precarious political position. King Edward II was no different. His father had never defeated the Scots, so if Edward could subdue them, the nobles who opposed him couldn't argue that he was a weak king.
The campaign lasted from November 1310 to August 1311. 15-year-old Isabella accompanied her husband north to the port of Berwick-upon-Tweed, where Edward coordinated his army.
But with only 3 of the 11 English earls supporting him, Edward didn't have the numbers to defeat the now Scottish king, Robert the Bruce. In fact, Edward never even faced Bruce in battle.
As a result, Thomas of Lancaster and the other Ordainers had the clout to impose massive restrictions on Edward's power. As part of the 41 ordinances, Edward was barred from unilaterally declaring war, and couldn't even depart from England without the Ordainers' permission. And of course, they demanded Piers Gaveston's exile.
Stuck between a rock and a hard place, Edward had no choice but to agree. On November 1st, 1311, Gaveston once again left England, and like the first 2 exiles, the third didn't take. By January 1312, Piers Gaveston was back.
Realizing her husband would never abandon Gaveston, 17-year-old Isabella took charge of the situation. While Edward and Gaveston were ensconced together in the city of York, Isabella sent letters to Thomas of Lancaster and other influential Ordainers on her husband's behalf.
Perhaps realizing that her diplomatic efforts were a lost cause, Isabella joined Edward and Gaveston in the northern English city of York around February 21st, 1312. Edward was apparently very grateful to have her by his side. Shortly after arriving, she became pregnant with their first child.
We don't know if they actively tried to conceive before this point, or if Edward had even slept with Isabella yet. Edward seemed to have respected the fact that Isabella was far too young to bear children when they were first married, and besides, he was rather occupied with Piers Gaveston.
But as of February 1312, he certainly had eyes for Isabella.
However, that didn't mean Edward moved on from Piers Gaveston. In fact, he cared so much about Gaveston, he offered to officially recognize Robert the Bruce as King of Scotland in exchange for sheltering Gaveston from Thomas of Lancaster and the Ordainers.
Bruce refused the offer. He said he couldn't trust Edward to hold up his end of the bargain. After all, Edward had promised to exile Gaveston twice, and each time he reneged on his word.
With Robert the Bruce refusing to help, Edward didn't dare to risk the danger of returning to London. What he didn't realize, though, was that the danger was coming to him.
While Isabella, Edward, and Gaveston were holed up in the northern city of Newcastle, Thomas of Lancaster was slowly making his way north. On the surface, he was traveling around the country hosting jousting tournaments. In reality, he was using the events as an excuse to recruit an army. On May 3rd, 1312, Edward learned that Lancaster's forces were only a few hours away. They took the king completely by surprise. Edward and Gaveston fled to Scarborough, while Isabella returned to the fortified safety of York.
Edward left Galveston in Scarborough on May 10th, 1312, then continued on to join Isabella in York. It seems strange that Edward would abandon him, but Galveston was sick at the time. He may have been too weak to travel.
Whatever Edward's reason for leaving Galveston was, it was a huge mistake. Shortly after he left Scarborough, Lancaster's allies arrived to besiege the castle house in Galveston.
I saw her battle
Galveston
cancer.
didn't
That's
stand a
another thing.
chance.
I thought she
He
was done because
surrendered
of that.
after 9
She
days.
had cancer 20
On
years
May
ago when she made
28th,
it through there. And I saw
1312,
her
he
through
was
everything.
officially taken
She
prisoner.
coached golf
Trapped
through
near
cancer,
York,
through everything.
Edward was powerless to help Galveston. His captors knew that exiling Galveston was pointless, and if they imprisoned him, Edward would stop at nothing to get him back. So on June 19th, 1312, they murdered Galveston and left his dead body lying in the road.
Edward learned of the execution 1 week later. He returned to London at once, leaving Isabella behind in York for her own safety.
We don't know how Isabella felt about Galveston's death, but it was most likely a mix of relief and anger. On the one hand, Edward was clearly in love with Galveston, perhaps even more than with Isabella. But on the other, the Ordainers had struck a powerful blow against the monarchy by killing the king's favorite, and by extension, that put Isabella in a precarious position.
Civil war seemed inevitable, but a few days before Christmas 1312, both sides stood down. No matter how much Edward loved Piers Gaveston, his grief wasn't worth unnecessary bloodshed. And for the Ordainers, their mission was already accomplished. All they really cared about was getting rid of Gaveston.
Perhaps Edward's willingness to let the insult go came from the birth of his and Isabella's son on November 13, 1312. Also named Edward, the baby boy cemented his father's
She was
legacy.
the only one.
The
I mean,
older Edward
unless
may
you knew
have
someone in
preferred
the
to
country
secure
club or
his
something,
heir's future, rather than
there were
risk
no like
everything to
public
avenge Piers
force.
Gaveston's death.
Although 17-year-old
And
Isabella
wow,
was a
I mean,
new
I made it on
mother,
private
she
schools.
wasn't
We
expected
are
to drop all
public
her royal
force.
duties to raise little Edward. Instead, she placed him in the care of a wet nurse. While Edward III's parents spent as much time with him as possible given their responsibilities, he was raised independently from them in a separate household.
Yeah.
With their son uniting them and Piers Gaveston
Which is
gone,
rare.
King Edward II and Isabella
Usually
grew
private
closer
school
than
kids
ever.
are in private school.
On May 23rd,
It's rare that you're in private
1313,
school.
they
Rare that
traveled
you're
to
private school
France,
kids on public.
marking the first time
Not
Isabella
that
returned to her
rare. Public
homeland
schools
since
are
her
very
wedding
small.
5 years earlier.
Their deepening
What
bond
is
was illustrated by a near crisis that
public
took
school
place
kids
one night
who have
while they were
private school
staying in the
membership. So
city of
where I was, that
Pontoise,
was the common thing.
one that
The
could have
private schools were
changed the
very good.
course of
The
history
public schools
had
were very
things
good.
gone differently.
Yeah, for high
While the
school,
royal couple
but
slept, a fire broke out in their silk-draped pavilion. The flames consumed everything in sight, but before the fire could devour the royal couple, Edward leaped into action. He swooped Isabella into his arms and carried her to safety.
This isn't to say that he wouldn't have tried to save Isabella if he didn't love her, but it was affection, not duty, that propelled his actions that night. Chroniclers such as Geoffrey of Paris remarked that Edward saved Isabella because love made him do it.
They had come a long way from Edward not even bothering to hang Isabella's coat of arms at their coronation.
Their growing partnership seems to have spurred Edward's willingness to make peace with Thomas of Lancaster and the lords who killed Piers Gaveston. Upon returning to England, Edward officially pardoned them on October 16, 1313.
In the records from this mass pardon, Edward made sure to specifically call his wife, our very dear lady, Lady Isabella, Queen of England.
Isabella had taken on a prominent role in affairs of state. Edward trusted her so much, he even allowed her to conduct important negotiations on her own.
In late February 1314, 18-year-old Isabella was sent to parley with her father, King Philip IV of France, over issues relating to the English-controlled Gascony region in France. The two countries had traded the area back and forth over the years, and there was still some legal wrangling taking place over the deal.
The negotiations appeared to have gone well, and Isabella's diplomatic efforts allowed Edward to focus on other, more pressing matters. Once again, trouble was brewing in Scotland.
King Robert the Bruce of Scotland had grown bold and was leading incursions into England. In June 1313, Bruce's men encircled the strategically important Stirling Castle, which guarded a crucial crossing over the River Forth.
Edward couldn't let such an insult go unanswered. In the spring of 1314, he planned a campaign to defend Stirling Castle. However, like his last foray north, only 3 earls signed on to Edward's mission. Most notably, Thomas of Lancaster refused to join the mission.
Normally, this insolence would be punished, but even after forgiving the ordainers, Edward didn't have the political capital to bend Lancaster to his will.
Even so, enough noblemen joined the cause for Edward to move forward with the plan. Isabella traveled north with him and waited in the port city of Berwick-upon-Tweed.
Once again, Edward's effort to defeat Robert the Bruce was a spectacular failure. At the Battle of Bannockburn, Bruce's men overwhelmed Edward's cavalry, which got bogged down in the marshy terrain.
On June 27, 1314, Edward returned to Berwick-upon-Tweed in humiliation. Instead of arriving at the head of a triumphant army, he limped back in a borrowed fishing boat with only a few men by his side.
The humiliating defeat allowed Thomas of Lancaster to move against Edward. With Edward's forces depleted, Lancaster was able to force the king to replace his household officers with men sympathetic to himself. He also compelled Edward to accept a paltry allowance of £10 a day.
While this was a large sum for the time, it paled in comparison to Lancaster's income, which was a staggering £11,000 per year. Essentially, Edward was at his rival's mercy.
In early 1316, Lancaster asserted his increased power. At a meeting of Parliament on February 12th, he bullied his way into being named the chief of Edward's council. Edward didn't take this appointment well. In August 1316, the two men had a furious face-to-face argument, and the relationship deteriorated even further.
Perhaps as an olive branch, Isabella asked her uncle Lancaster to be the godfather of her newborn son, John. He refused.
Despite this slap in the face, Edward and Isabella kept trying to mend fences. This fraught relationship was approaching the point of no return. If something didn't change, England would likely descend into a civil war.
According to the Chronicle of the Life of Edward II, 23-year-old Isabella took charge in brokering peace. Though it's unclear exactly what she did, it's possible she was responsible for organizing a coalition of nobles who shepherded the truce the two men agreed to on August 7, 1318.
In exchange for Edward promising to uphold the ordinances imposed on him in 1311, Lancaster agreed to stop holding armed assemblies. It seemed as though the kingdom was unified and peace would come to England.
But as one rival receded, another one emerged.
But this new enemy wasn't a threat to Edward.
I can't believe she's
He
still
was a
alive.
threat to Isabella.
Yeah, because
Coming up,
we saw
Isabella
her
faces another challenger for her husband's
almost die,
affections.
and
Now back to the story.
came back, and
On August 7,
you wouldn't
1318,
have really known it.
34-year-old King Edward II finally made peace with his rebellious cousin Thomas of Lancaster. Edward's wife, 23-year-old Isabella of France, was instrumental in settling their feud.
Isabella had come into her own in the decades since becoming Queen of England.
For the
She
little
was
ones,
no
we
longer
don't
relegated to the
have real
sideline
clubs
by
of boss.
Edward's companion, Piers Gaveston. She was a
We just
force
want
in
them
her
to
own
get
right,
used to
and much
making
of the
us
kingdom's
have a
prosperity
shop
was
and
thanks to
rolling
her.
ball.
But in 1318, all that progress was undone when Edward
Did they have
appointed a new
did they have
chamberlain,
real balls in
Hugh
your king?
Despenser the Younger.
But
Despenser was married to Edward's niece, and by
that was
becoming his
also
chamberlain,
20
he
years
grew
before
even closer to the king. All access
it
to
was a
Edward
liberal
went through
culture, and
Despenser,
kicking
and
cancer.
the new
There you go.
Chamberlain took
Twice in the past
personal
18 years, Robert
advantage of
has
that
in the
connection.
bathroom cancer
He
capital.
gained
Both has the most
significant
recent 2
influence
years
in
ago.
court
She never
by
missed a day with the
requiring a
kids.
bribe
I mean,
in
she was
exchange
there
for an
every
audience with
fucking
Edward.
week. That was the
Edward
amazing thing
either
about it.
didn't know about
Because
this
you really
or
saw her
didn't
every
care.
fucking week. She never missed.
Dispenser
Really?
quickly became
Yeah.
his most trusted
So who was the
advisor,
guy who you thought?
and
Maybe
perhaps
he just
even
worked.
more.
Oh, I think that's it. I
Rumors
think he just
swirl
worked it,
that
but we all thought it was
Dispenser
her
was
son.
Edward's
Really,
lover.
but no.
By this point, Isabella
It's
was
like a
used to
redhead
her
kid.
husband's affection for men. In
She never
addition
missed a
to
day.
his romance with
I
Piers Gaveston
worked
at the
with
beginning
the
of
chemo
Isabella's
treatment. She
reign,
did. And I would
Edward
rather
had
be on the
indulged
course
a
of my extended
rotating
family or be
cast of male favorites in the
home
years
looking
since Gaveston's
at
murder.
4 walls thinking
None
about
of this particularly
would I
seemed
rather
to
be on the
bother
course of their
Isabella.
extended family or
Although
home
Edward's
living
dalliances
house.
may have been annoying,
That was no
none
brainer. She
threatened her
chose
position of power.
even to
Edward always
send me a
treated
little
Isabella with the respect she deserved as
in
his
her office
queen.
gathering
However,
energy
he failed to
to
show the same
match
deference
that
to the
of the young
nobles at his court.
Just
Every
like
now and then,
Edward had
pros
done with
and
Piers
the air coaches
Gaveston,
would
he
stop by to
showed
see
far
if
too much favoritism
through
to
that
Hugh
Saturday
Dispenser
time.
the
After my
younger.
surgery,
In October 1320,
I
he
had
gave
to take a
Dispenser
break in
lordship
the hospital
over
for a
the
week for
valuable
pneumonia.
Gower
The
Peninsula
day
in
after I got
southern
out, I was
Wales.
at the golf course.
He
Not
did
sure
so
my
at the
doctor would
expense
have
of several
settled for health
nobles who
issues
had
that
better claims
Robert's
to the
been playing
land.
the game she loves for the last 8 years. I miss
These
the
lords
ice.
were known as the
I know
Marchers
it's
because
still
the land
there.
between
It's
England and
in the end of
Wales
life.
was
I
called
found
the
the most
March.
important element
And in
to
December
me is the past
1321,
one to
they
others.
marched
Maybe
back to
Stephen
their
Baker has
castles
been
and
hard.
vowed
It's
to overthrow Hugh Dispenser the
like
younger.
my babies
Their
in limbo,
leader
she
was a
said.
familiar
But
face,
she's
King
not about
Edward's
to walk
cousin,
away from
Thomas of
it. Whether
Lancaster.
it's teaching on a
Though he
personal
barely
level or
had any
military,
land in the
Robert
march,
feels she has
Lancaster
the
was
leadership.
more interested in
Everyone
resuming
plans to retire on
hostilities
their
with
own terms,
Edward
but that's
than in
not always the
protecting
case.
any Welsh
Unless I'm a
holdings.
teacher in
The
person
Marchers
and
demanded that Edward exile
along
Hugh
the
Dispenser.
along the creek, I've
Unsurprisingly,
taught thousands
Edward
of dogs.
resisted.
I want golf
Instead
to
of
be
giving
fun,
in to the
not
Marchers'
complicated. I want
demands,
to give my
Edward raised an
students
army on March
something
1st,
to work
1321, and left
on
to
their
confront
own,
his rebellious
to be
underlings.
their own
In the
coach.
past,
Grandparents who
Isabella
converted
would have
from
accompanied
and
Edward
on
as his
the
trusted partner.
said
But
they
this
will continue
time,
from
he
the
left
rooftop
Isabella
and
behind.
but how that will
Instead, Hugh Dispenser
all these years,
accompanied
Robert
him
is
to
still
face the
impressed about
marchers.
Without
golf
Isabella
means
at his side,
our
Edward
community.
failed to mollify the Marchers. Instead, he only antagonized them further. On May 2nd, 1321, he made Dispenser the custodian of Marlborough Castle. Although it wasn't located in Wales, just the act of giving him more land was a slap in the Marchers' faces, and they responded in kind.
And going to
2 days after the Marlborough Castle designation, the marchers attacked Dispenser's holdings in southern Wales. These actions kicked off what was known as the Dispenser War.
After mercilessly looting the Welsh countryside, the Marchers turned their attention toward London. Parliament was scheduled to meet in mid-July, and the Marchers wanted to use their influence to force Edward's
If
hand.
you can do what
They
she can,
arrived in London on July 29th,
consistently,
1321.
you'll
With their armies
never lose a
surrounding
fucking
the
golf
city,
tournament.
they demanded
It's like,
Hugh Dispenser
I
the
don't know off
Younger's
the tee how
exile.
long you have to be to
If
compete with
Edward
these guys now,
refused, they
but
would forcefully depose
if
him.
I could sit her, Melanie, if I could hit the ball 300 yards off the tee, and I
Isabella
can,
realized the severity of the situation.
I just can't see exactly how far, but I can
She
hit it like,
threw pride out the window and
when I was
literally
playing
begged
Tiger Woods,
Edward to
I was
cede
hitting
to
it
the Marchers' demands.
pretty close between 290 and 320,
He agreed
and
to exile Dispenser.
But
maybe
it
280
wasn't a
and 320,
promise he intended
but
to
dead
keep.
fucking straight.
The moment
That's all
Dispenser
that
left,
fucking matters. It
Edward
does not
started
matter.
plotting
Maybe it was
ways to
270,
facilitate his
but dead
return.
fucking straight. That's all that fucking matters. She's gonna say,
In
where'd it
order
go?
to bring
And I'm gonna say,
Dispenser
dead
back,
fucking straight. And then she's
Edward
gonna say,
needed more
okay,
people to
if
join
this
his
ball
cause,
went dead straight,
which meant
I doesn't
he needed
320,
public sentiment to be
270,
on his side.
220, 220 yards.
Isabella was a
If it's dead
crucial
fucking
part
straight
of his
every time.
plan to get
Really?
it. No matter how much Isabella
But I'm like, no,
disliked
dead
Dispenser,
fucking straight.
she actually hated
I have it
the
on
Marchers
camera.
more. Edward was still
I
her
don't know
husband.
exactly the
A
length,
threat to
but
him
I do know
was a threat to
dead fucking
Isabella.
straight. So she's like,
Around
well, that's
October
great.
13th,
Then what? Then
1321,
it's your approach shot, which
Isabella
actually
stopped at Leeds Castle for the night during a
the
pilgrimage
approach
to
shot's the most
Canterbury.
key of all
The
the
castle
shots.
belonged to Lord Bartholomew Battlesmere,
And
who was aligned with the Marchers. But as Queen of England, Isabella had the legal right
that
to
one's
demand
pretty
shelter
simple.
for the night.
If you can
Even
keep
so,
this like
Lord
perfect
Battlesmere's
pendulum
wife, who was
that
watching
she
the
would
castle
teach
while her
and
husband
keep your
was
fucking
away,
left arm really
denied
straight
Isabella's
and
request. Just as the king and queen had
and
hoped.
hit the ball
In response to this
like a
insult,
fucking
Edward
machine,
ordered a siege of Leeds
It will
Castle.
depending on
Unlike his previous forays to Scotland,
and that was the
almost
other thing.
every English
She
girl
taught
came
us.
to fight for Isabella's
It's not
honor,
about how
with the
fast
notable exception
necessarily
of the
you
troublesome
swing.
Thomas
That's
of
fine.
Lancaster.
You're gonna
The castle fell
you
in
will
a matter of
roll
days.
off your weight
Even
and you'll
though
be
the Marcher's
inconsistent.
army was
But
still
if you
4
keep
times
the
bigger
same
than Edward's,
strength
momentum
and
was
you just
firmly on the king's side.
this was more for
In
putting,
early
but even it
1322,
works for
Edward's forces seized 2 of Thomas of Lancaster's castles.
any
Around the same
club.
time,
If
the
you
royal
just say
army
like,
captured
okay, well this is
prominent
10%,
Marcher Lord
and this
Roger
is
Mortimer of
20%, and
Whitby.
this is 30%, and this is 40%,
With
whatever.
Lancaster severely
10,
weakened
20, 30,
and
40,
Roger
50,
Mortimer
60,
in
70,
irons,
80, 90,
Edward
and
was
this is
back on
100%
top.
of what my
On
swing is.
March 3rd,
At,
1322,
like what
he allowed
what
Hugh Despenser the Younger to
what
return
range do I
to
need to
England.
make it to
As
hit the ball
Lancaster's army retreated,
within this
Isabella
certain
wrote to the sheriffs
range?
of
So if I go
Cumberland
at
and
like
Yorkshire to
20,
intercept him.
and I know
Their
that the
combined
loft on this
forces
club
met
is
Lancaster at
like
the
that's
town
the
of
thing she would teach you.
Boroughbridge on March
She's like,
16,
let the loft
1322.
do the work.
Thanks to Isabella's
So
brilliant
you hit
strategy,
down on the ball, which is
Lancaster
always
was captured in
counterintuitive,
the battle's
but
aftermath.
she'd be like,
He was sentenced
it
to
has
death
loft for
shortly after.
these kids.
Edward
She'd be like,
purposely had
she'd always have
Lancaster's
I think a
execution
7.
mirror Piers
Really?
Gaveston's.
Yeah.
The king
It
forced
was
his
kind of like
cousin
an
to
in the
ride
middle.
atop a mule
But
to the
she
summit
had
of a small
it
hill,
depended
where he
what
was
she was
then
doing.
beheaded.
Really, yeah.
Records
But she would
show
always
that
put on
Isabella
like
was
one club,
probably there to
and
witness
we
it.
would learn.
With the
To
Marchers
start off,
defeated,
I think we learned
Edward
cutting,
confiscated their
and then we
lands.
learned it was something
However,
every week.
Isabella didn't
And
receive any of the spoils. Instead, almost all of the rewards went to Hugh Despenser the Younger.
That's what's fucking up.
In the aftermath
So
of
is
the
that,
war,
man.
Isabella's influence dwindled as dispensers grew. In 1322 and 1323, she practically disappeared from the historical record.
It seems that even though Isabella played a crucial role in Despenser's return, she was still being punished for asking Edward to exile him back in 1321. And Edward's preference for Despenser over her wasn't just a blow to Isabella's honor. It put her very life in danger.
In late 1322, Edward organized yet
All
another
the
campaign
fucking-
against his northern nemesis, King Robert the Bruce of Scotland.
Oh
As
man.
always, it was a
That's why.
catastrophic failure, and this
What?
time, Isabella got caught in the crossfire.
As Edward retreated from the northern border, Bruce led a counter-invasion into England. Isabella,
Alright, so
who
you
was
got rid of all
staying
your
in
fucking
Tynemouth at
things.
the time, was trapped
Alright,
about
here you
80
go.
miles north of Edward's position.
Alright.
She was certain that Hugh Despenser was guilty of falsely and treacherously counseling the king to
Really?
leave her in peril.
Thankfully, Isabella managed to reach safety before Robert the Bruce's men arrived.
Oh
But
God,
what
Robert
she
Bruce.
perceived as her abandonment left a bitter taste in her mouth, and it never went away.
After the failed 1322 Scottish campaign, things went from bad to worse for Edward. On August 1st, 1323, Marcher Lord Roger Mortimer escaped from the Tower of London and fled to France. And thanks to renewed tensions between Edward and the French king, Mortimer was welcomed with open arms.
By now, Isabella's brother Charles had ascended to their father's throne. Since Edward controlled the lands of Poitou and Gascony in France, he technically had to pay homage to the new king. But as a monarch in his own right, Edward didn't want to kneel to a man he considered his equal.
As the two rulers played chicken over this symbolic ceremony,
You should actually
those tensions bled into the two countries' diplomatic relations.
use the amount of movement
Things
as
were
possible.
particularly troublesome in the English-controlled French
Did
village
Tommy
of
and Kelly met?
Saint-Sardos.
Which country
No.
had jurisdiction
Really?
over the small
Yep.
town had
They
been a
came-
matter
they
of
went to this-
contention for years. But things finally came to a head on October 15,
Really?
1323.
Yes, they did. They
When
came
a
in
French
on
soldier
the
placed
summer,
a stake
and they
in the
didn't have
middle of the
school,
village,
and
claiming
Kelly
it for France.
was in
In
this. Did they play the whole?
The local
How
English
many?
lord hanged the French soldier
Um,
and burned
they
down
played-
Saint-Sardos.
The French
Kelly
king
would
took
know
matters
Melanie.
into his
Really?
own hands. On
She
July
played in
5th,
this golf league
1324, he
in
seized
Pawnee at
Edward's holdings
Studebaker
in France.
with Tommy.
With that,
Really?
the War of
And I played
Saint-Sardos
there.
commenced.
and we would go in on Fridays.
On July 21st, Edward arrested every French subject living in England.
I mean, you read it in the article.
Confiscated their
I just can't believe she's still alive.
claiming it was payment
Why?
for the income he lost from his French holdings.
This extended to Isabella. Edward
Well,
confiscated
I'll say
his
it's
own
not like she
wife's
ever looked
lands in
old.
Cornwall
I
and
would
the
say I saw
counties
her
of
the way she
Oxfordshire
looks.
and Wiltshire.
She's looked like that
Although we don't know exactly how Isabella
for
reacted to this insult, she seems to have put on a brave face. In early 1325, she agreed to go to France in an attempt to arrange a
She looks the
peace
same.
between her husband and her brother.
Shut that one kid
After being
quickly
sidelined for years, 30-year-old Isabella was finally back in the game. She was being trusted with the most important diplomatic mission of her
somebody
life.
hit that last name.
Even though Edward had neglected her during the past few years, he still had a great deal of faith in his wife. But perhaps he shouldn't have trusted her.
Although Isabella left England as a diplomat, she would
Who was Carol
return
quickly?
as a conqueror.
Bill Clinton's. He wrote Tragedy and Hope. He's Bill Clinton's mentor at.
Thanks for listening to Dictators. Next week, we'll follow Isabella's stunning turn on Edward and their battle over the English throne.
Among the many sources we used, we found Isabella of France, the Rebel Queen, by Catherine Warner, extremely helpful to our research.
You can find all episodes
Real
of
Tragedy and Hope.
Dictators
I
and
know
all
that.
other podcast originals for free on Spotify. Not only does Spotify
Oh,
already
George.
have all of your favorite music, but now Spotify is making it easy for you to enjoy all of your favorite podcast originals like Dictators for free from your phone, desktop, or smart speaker.
To stream Dictators on Spotify, just open the app and type Dictators in the search bar.
And don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Parcast and Twitter at Parcast Network. We'll see you next time.
Dictators was created by Max Cutler and is a Parcast Studios original. It is executive produced by Max Cutler, sound designed by Dick Schroeder, with production assistance by Ron Shapiro, Carly Madden, and Travis Clark. This episode of Dictators was written by Alex Benedon, with writing assistance by Kay Gallagher, and stars Kate Leonard and Richard Rossner.
Pissed off.
Hi, listeners. If you love the podcast Dictators, don't forget to check out the new Spotify original from Parcast, Very Presidential with Ashley Flowers. Every Tuesday through the 2020 election, host Ashley Flowers shines a light on the darker side of the American presidency, exposing the most damning details surrounding history's most high-profile leaders. To hear more, follow Very Presidential with Ashley Flowers, free on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts.
That is about the future. It's like is
On the evening of October 19th, 1330, 35-year-old Isabella of France was staying at a castle in Nottingham. A Queen Regent of England, she was there to oversee a session of Parliament.
That night, Isabella was conferring with her chief advisor, Roger Mortimer, and a gaggle of other allies. Her 4-year reign was becoming increasingly unpopular.
yeah. Sometimes that happens.
Instead of
Someone
fair,
it's such a
equitable
common
leadership, Isabella handed out land and titles to her favored courtiers, particularly Mortimer.
Isabella knew she was on thin ice. Earlier that year, she had barely fended off a vengeful lord's rebellion. She was so paranoid about another uprising, she had personal custody over the castle's keys.
The queen was right to be worried. As Isabella discussed strategy with her advisors, the door to her chamber flew open.
Isabella was shocked to see her son, 17-year-old King Edward III, standing in the doorway. Several knights stood at his back, and their swords were drawn.
They had the element of surprise and easily overwhelmed the few men defending Isabella. In short order, Roger Mortimer was hauled off in chains, and young Edward placed his mother under armed guard.
Isabella's own son had usurped her, but she wasn't entirely surprised.
After all, she had done the same thing to her husband.
Calm down, lady.
Welcome to
Jackhammer
Dictators,
herself.
the Parcast
Really?
original.
Yeah, this is what I'm
I'm
talking about.
Richard.
I don't go on
and I'm
Tinder,
Kate.
but
On
I
this
did this
show,
one time.
we're
Just one
going
time,
deep
I
into
was
the
just I
minds
had
of some of history's most hated
like auto
despots. In
likers
this
and stuff. I
season,
was
we're
just rigging
delving
the
into the
fucking thing,
stories of
and
bloody
I got every single
female
girl on
rulers in the
on
Middle Ages and
Tinder,
Renaissance.
and I got
You
every
can
single
find all
girl
episodes
on
of Dictators and all other
Plenty of
Arcast
Fish.
originals for
Sorry,
free on
J Swipe.
Spotify. To stream
And
Dictators for free on Spotify,
I was like, I
just
won
open
it.
the
I
app
won the
and
whole
type
thing. But every girl,
Dictators in
when
the
you got
search
every
bar.
single girl who
This
at
is
one
the
point
second
said yes,
episode on
swipe right. I
Isabella
mean, you
of
win the game.
France, who
Anyway,
reigned as Queen
I
of
was like,
England
I
from
wonder what it's like to
1308
talk
to
to one of these girls.
1330.
So
But it
this is going
wasn't
to San
until
Diego, and I was like,
1326 when she held real
hey,
power.
what did I
Last
say?
week, we
I think I
covered
gave her
Isabella's
an introduction
tempestuous marriage to
or
King
some
Edward
shit. No,
II.
I think I
Despite
just
her
said,
abilities as a stateswoman, she found herself overshadowed by Edward's
we
favorite male
matched or something,
advisors,
and I
like
said,
Hugh Despenser the Younger.
This week, we'll follow Isabella as she makes the painful decision to turn on her husband. We'll also see her repeat
I
King
forget the first
Edward's
thing I said to her.
mistakes as she ruins her kingdom in
But,
order to enrich
it was
herself
like,
and her companion, Roger Mortimer.
We dive into Isabella's treachery.
I think I just got right down to business. And I was like, you want to meet up?
On March
And
9th,
she's like,
1325,
what did you have in mind? And I
29-year-old
said,
Isabella of France arrived in her
I'll
homeland
jackhammer you.
as the head of a
And she
crucial
just gave me a
diplomatic
number.
mission.
For years, England and France were at odds as to who controlled the
It was very
territories of
simple. Did you
Ponthieu
ever
and
know? But
Gascony,
she's saying it.
land that was technically
Good,
in
yeah.
France. Tensions finally came to a head in July 1324 when an
There's this
argument
machine
over
I want to build
jurisdiction
that's like
of the
when you're
village
fucking a
of
girl
Saint-Sardos
this way, I call it
led to both
derricking,
countries
like an oil
declaring
derrick.
war.
But I don't want to be at an
Isabella's
angle.
husband,
I
King Edward
want to be
II
straight
of
up and down,
England,
perfectly
trusted
perpendicular
her to
to like
arrange a
the
peace
center
treaty
of the
with
earth.
King
Like very, very
Charles IV of
scientific. I
France,
want this.
who
If it's like
just so
this, it'd be like,
happened to
no,
be
you're off. Or like,
Isabella's brother.
that's
While
like a 7. I
Isabella's
want
family
90
ties
fucking
made
degrees.
her
I
an
want this bitch to be
ideal
like, what
representative
it be
for
like?
the peace cause. That wasn't Edward's only motivation to
Yeah,
send
how
her
is she?
in his
She's
stead.
like this.
Rather, he did it to protect his beloved
Basically,
Chamberlain
I'm gonna hurt
and
myself,
possible
but then I'm like,
lover,
kata.
Despenser
Anyway,
the Younger.
Dispenser was almost
but it's off the
universally
bat.
loathed
Really?
throughout England. So much so that just a few years earlier, a group of noblemen known as the Marcher
But are you
Lords
done?
started a civil war to try and get rid of him.
I like that girl.
Ultimately, the Marchers were
Really?
defeated, and many of them fled to the European continent. But they had a long memory.
So when it came to
An extra
negotiating
5 and
peace
5
with
is
France, Edward
0.0
was
point
in a
differential.
no-win situation.
16th on
If
offense,
he went himself
16th in
and brought
defense,
Despenser,
and 15 in
they'd be
offense.
vulnerable to
They
attacks
played
from
5 home
exiled
games
marcher lords
and
like
5 road
Roger
games. They are
Mortimer,
1-1
one of the
overtime.
king's most
As
vocal
an extra
critics.
simulation,
And if
they're not 5
Edward
and
went
5.
to France but
0.0
left
point
Despenser at
differential.
home,
They're
the
16
Chamberlain would be at the mercy of the lords who resented his oversized influence at court.
They're 1-1
And so,
overtime.
Edward sent his wife instead.
Yeah, they are a simulation. Next question.
Sending Isabella wasn't without its own risks, though.
Is this real life?
Since she was the husband to one
I like how
king
this
and the
bitch
sister to
tried to
another,
cut out your
she
camera.
was quite a
Peace out,
valuable
bitch.
ransom target.
Watch this bitch just take your
Of course,
ass out. Get
would
out of the
someone
fucking...
like
Lady,
Roger
move.
Mortimer
Lady, move.
want to risk drawing
Lady,
the
move.
ire
Lady,
of two
move.
kings? It would be a
Stop.
lot of unnecessary bloodshed just to get back at King Edward.
Thankfully, Isabella arrived at her
bent that
brother's
fucking
court in
pole
France
really
without
badly.
issue, and she didn't seem
Like,
to hold a
give us
grudge
the
against her
fucking-
husband.
Even though Edward had proverbially slapped Isabella in the face by confiscating her lands in southern England the year before, the two of them seemed to be on good terms. Perhaps she bought his excuse that he did it as a safeguarding measure against the French. Or maybe she wanted to stay in Edward's good graces.
Either way, she appeared to have nothing but love for her husband. In a letter sent to Edward from France on March 31st, 1325, she called him my very sweetheart throughout.
Really, yeah.
If she was mad at him for taking away her lands or for risking her safety,
Super,
she
super
didn't
nice.
show it.
Really?
And she
I'm
backed
nothing
up
bad to
those
say about
words
it,
with
really.
actions. After nearly
Nope,
2
that's
months
good
of
when they made her crew
negotiations,
leader. She wrote
Isabella
further.
and King Charles
and-
agreed to a peace treaty on May 30th,
Anything else about it?
1325.
Unfortunately, Edward was on the losing end of
Pick
it.
that lady. But I mean,
He
this is
had
a
to
lady
pay
who would show
Charles
up
a
every single
significant
day to work
financial
at 4 in
tribute
the morning,
and surrender
5, 4
his
in the morning.
claim to the Agenais
like,
region, which contained
clockwork.
the village of Saint-Sardos. But
I don't really
Isabella
ever
wasn't to
remember
blame
calling
for
in.
the unfavorable
Really?
terms.
And
Edward was losing the war, and he didn't have much leverage. If
she's a really
anything,
hard worker, really nice
Isabella
person.
got him the best deal
Anything else you want to say
possible.
about her? She used her car for a vehicle.
Normally, Isabella would have returned to England upon completion of the peace talks, but the treaty had a stipulation that made her want to stay in France for the time being.
In addition to the financial penalties, Edward had to pay homage to Charles on August 29, 1325. This requirement was a major
And then
embarrassment.
they all went away.
As a king in his own right, Edward balked at the thought of kneeling to his French counterpart. But if Edward wanted to keep his French holdings of Gascony and Poitou, he had to suck it up and kneel before King Charles.
Unfortunately, Edward was still facing a lingering problem. If he went to France, he was essentially forfeiting Hugh Despenser's life, and he couldn't have Isabella do it for him this time because she didn't have a claim to his French
Which one's
territories.
which?
But there was one other
That's a good
person
question.
who
You
could
can't tell the
fulfill
difference.
the act in his place.
The
Their
girl on the
son.
left
In the
looks
summer of 1325,
more feminine.
Prince Edward was 12 years
Right?
old.
Yeah, the girl
Although
on
he
the
was
right hand
still
looks
young,
strong.
he was old enough to hold lands and titles. King Edward could bestow his French territories to the prince, who would then
I
be
don't know.
required to
You
pay
can't tell the
homage to
difference. Which one's
Charles
the girl?
IV.
I think that
However, sending the prince had its own set of drawbacks. If King Edward transferred his French holdings to his son, the income
Show the
from them
paramore.
would go to the prince's household,
Why?
not the king's.
Even more worrisome,
they're
Prince
bad.
Edward would
That's
still be vulnerable to attacks from Roger Mortimer and his displaced English allies who were lurking somewhere in France.
Yeah.
Plus, there was the risk that King Charles would renege on their peace
So
and
that's
hold
that
the
way.
prince hostage.
Once again,
Okay.
King Edward was stuck between a rock and a hard place. But like before, his love for Hugh Despenser was greater than his love for his family. So on September 12th, 1325, he sent his son to France.
The young prince officially paid homage to King Charles on September 24th. Charles gladly accepted his nephew.
But Isabella wasn't pleased with the situation. Although her business in France was finished, she refused to return to England. It's not completely clear why, but her marriage to King Edward had suddenly hit a breaking point.
To my knowledge.
Most likely, it had to do with the fact that Edward prioritized Hugh Despenser's safety over their sons.
Anything else?
Prince Edward was the heir to the English throne. Hugh Despenser was nothing more than a minor lord. The king cared more about his chamberlain than his legacy, and Isabella couldn't let that stand.
Sometime around early November 1325, she publicly stated, "I feel that marriage is a joining together of man and woman, and that someone has come between my husband and myself trying to break this bond. I protest that I will not return until this intruder is removed."
King Edward didn't take kindly to Isabella's betrayal. In mid-November 1325, he stripped her of her income. On December 1st, he wrote her a letter demanding that she and Prince Edward return to England at once. He also doubled down on his support of Hugh Despenser and refused to remove him from court.
But Isabella held firm. She didn't want to go, and there was nothing forcing her to leave. In response, King Charles said, "The Queen has come of her own will, and may freely return if she so wishes. But if she prefers to remain in these parts, she is my sister, and I refuse to expel her."
With both sides firmly entrenched, King Edward and Isabella began a battle that many estranged spouses endure, determining their son's future.
The camera's on.
At the time, the prince was betrothed to the young King of Castile's sister, Leonor. Leonor's mother was distantly related to King Edward. The marriage would presumably bring Castile onto his side if there was a war between Edward and Isabella.
However, King Edward didn't have Prince Edward marry Leonor before he left for France, and there was nothing legally forcing them to wed. Now that the prince was in Isabella's custody. She was free to secure a different match for him.
In December 1325, Isabella negotiated a betrothal between Prince Edward and Philippa of Hainault. Philippa's father, Count William of Hainault in Holland, was Isabella's first cousin. More importantly, William had considerable resources and could raise a large army. With him on Isabella's side, she had a fighting chance against her husband's sizable forces.
Although Prince Edward and Philippa needed to wait for dispensation from the Pope to marry, their betrothal was enough to bring others to Isabella's cause. Most notably, the exiled English lord, Roger Mortimer.
Several years earlier, Isabella and Mortimer were enemies. He was one of the most powerful archer lords who mobilized against King Edward. But in early 1326, he and Isabella joined forces. Presumably, he felt she was his best chance of returning home.
It's possible he also saw Isabella as something much more significant. Just as there were rumors that King Edward and Hugh Despencer were lovers, Isabella and Roger Mortimer's alliance was believed to be more than a political marriage collapse.
However, even as the gulf between Isabella and Edward widened, there was pressure on them to reconcile. On February 15, 1326, Pope John XXII sent envoys to both parties as mediators. His representative seems to have gotten through to Isabella. She agreed to return to England if Hugh Despencer left King Edward's side and her lands and titles
So you
were
gotta hang
restored to
on
her.
for dear life.
However, King Edward refused to yield. In letters to King Charles and Prince Edward, the English king once again defended Hugh Despencer and urged the prince to return home at
I want
once.
that one. I want to
The
be older.
Pope's attempt at reconciliation was an abject failure. Over the next few months, 1326 became an arms race.
On June 10th,
I
Isabella
kinda wanted
promised
to
to
win
give
them
the revenues
back
from
to
Prince
back, but
Edward's
I had
French
to
lands
try
to William of
put it on
Hainault
myself.
in exchange for ships and war supplies. In response, King Edward tried to regain his claim over the prince's lands by having the English subjects living there harass their
But then I'm
French
not gonna play
counterparts.
His
I only
gambit
play.
failed.
I only play in
King
one.
Charles occupied
one
those
tournament.
lands and
And I
made
wanna
sure
win it
the
again,
funds
Amber.
went to Prince
Really,
Edward
yeah.
and therefore
That's okay.
Isabella.
Undaunted, Edward sent a force of 140 ships to invade Normandy in August 1326.
Really?
As with almost every one of his military exploits,
Academy?
it didn't go well. He endured heavy losses and returned home empty-handed.
Isabella took the opportunity to strike. Around September 21st, the 31-year-old queen launched her invasion of England. She had 95 ships and approximately 2,000 men
Please check your
supporting her.
internet connection.
After
There's just
years
please
of
check your internet
insults,
connection, Mike.
Isabella's loyalty had run out.
She was
How
going
about
to
fuck your cow?
depose her husband.
How about no blood?
Coming up, Isabella's
Starts
invasion
Margaret.
begins.
She's very, very pretty when we were in.
Hi,
Was she
it's
in the?
Kate. From
She's in
trauma
the inside.
surgeons to
What did
hospice
she end up
staff,
going?
we all know that medical professionals are trained to give exceptional care. But what about those who use their skills not to heal,
No,
but hurt? In the new podcast series, Medical
I
Murders,
know a bunch
you'll
of those
discover a
university.
disturbing diagnosis that not every doctor wants to extend your life. Every Wednesday, Medical Murders introduces you to the worst the medical community has to offer.
Yep.
Men and women who took an oath to save lives,
I knew
but
one
instead
really hot girl.
used their
I had a bunch
expertise
of
to
them,
develop
actually,
more
but I don't
sinister
remember this one
specialties.
girl's name.
Join my dear
Really?
friend,
Yeah,
host
what the fuck?
Alistair Merton, as he examines the
She's very
formative
pretty.
years and motives of
I
history's
made out
most
with her.
infamous killers, dissecting
Who
their
else?
medical backgrounds with expert analysis and professional insight provided by practicing MD Dr. David Kipper.
Yeah.
You'll investigate a wide range of heinous healthcare workers, like the general practitioner believed to be the most prolific serial killer in modern
I think they
history,
changed the song of
or the dentist who led a double life as a hitman, or even the doctor
However it
and
is, like
gang
phonetic,
member
they
who
always
mixed
put-
deadly
it's
potions
like it
for
takes you
unhappy
too long to
housewives
tell
to
everybody
use
about
on their husbands.
Spell it how you want.
When it comes to these true crime stories, the only thing the doctor ordered
Her brother
is murder. Follow Medical Murders free on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts.
Now, back to the story.
We went to grade school. What was his name?
Around September 21st, 1326, Isabella's invasion force sailed for England.
Birthday, one of my friends'
Although she boasted nearly 100 ships and 2,000 men, it was a relatively small army. And she worried whether or not she had enough men to usurp her husband, King Edward II.
Shortly after landing at the coastal city of Orwell in Suffolk on September 24th, Isabella's forces were met by Thomas of Brotherton, King Edward's half-brother. Isabella's rebellion was in danger of being over before it even began. But Thomas didn't attack Isabella. He joined her.
It turned out that many English lords hated Hugh Despenser more than they respected the monarchy. After Thomas joined Isabella, influential bishops of Hereford, Lincoln, Ely, and Norwich came to her aid as well.
King Edward, holed up at the Tower of London, learned of Isabella's arrival 3 days after she landed, but by then, he was already at a disadvantage.
After his failed attack on Normandy, King Edward's numbers were depleted, so much so that as Isabella's troops marched inland, they faced little resistance.
When her opponents did choose to fight, Isabella showed no mercy, particularly when they took lands belonging to Hugh Despenser and his family. She allowed her men to loot whatever they wished, as long as she and Roger Mortimer each received a quarter of the spoils.
Desperate to turn the tide in his favor, Edward sent calls for soldiers throughout the country. He even released felons from jail in exchange for military service.
In October, Edward even left the Tower of London and headed for the March of Wales, whose lords had rebelled against him a few years ago because of Hugh Despenser. Perhaps Edward hoped they'd join him if he met them face to face.
His efforts were unsuccessful. Within the week, Henry of Lancaster, whose brother Thomas had died at Edward's hands, pledged his sizable resources to Isabella's rebellion instead.
Edward's decision to leave London was a spectacular misfire. He not only failed to win any significant support, but the moment he left, the people seized the
I'd never
Tower of
had
London.
it before. They don't fucking have
Left with nowhere to go,
Really?
King
They didn't
Edward,
even have
Hugh
fucking
Despenser,
quinoa
and
and
a few
dessert
others tried to sail
for a
away.
long fucking
On
time.
October 20th, 1326, they departed from southern Wales.
It's only available in
Most
like South
likely their
America.
destination was
So
an
it's only
island
been.
Despenser owned
I'll
in the
just say
Bristol
this:
Channel.
how many of you fucking Jew
From
bags are having
there, they
quinoa?
could
You
continue
survive.
on to Ireland and perhaps raise Irish troops.
However, the king couldn't even get the wind to cooperate. After 5 days of futile sailing, his party returned to shore. It was the latest in a string of blunders, and Isabella took full advantage of it.
Because Edward had left English soil, Isabella claimed he abandoned the kingdom. In his stead, she appointed 13-year-old Prince Edward as keeper of the realm. It was essentially a symbolic gesture, but it sent a powerful message. King Edward II's reign was coming to an end.
While Edward drifted around the ocean, Isabella attacked the city of Bristol, which was held by Hugh Despenser's father. After an 8-day siege, the city fell on October 26th.
Once again, Isabella showed no mercy. After a perfunctory trial, Despenser the Elder was sentenced to death. The
I said I went in
execution
there
was
and I wanted to
gruesome
see if they had
and
any
brutal.
kosher food there.
He was hanged, and then
Is that
his
true?
body was
Is that
fed
true?
to
Is that
dogs.
true? No.
Afterward, Despenser
What
the
was it?
Elder's
I
head
think
was
that-
placed
I
on
think
a
this is what it
spear
was.
and
I
displayed
had just
in his
been
home
to
city of
Walmart and they
Winchester.
just asked me if I was
It was a
Amish,
dark
and I said
portend
no.
of things to
And they
come.
always ask me that when I went to that one in Santa Ana, and I didn't want to go right past the guy again. And I knew why I had to go to the. It's like I go to the fucking store, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to the store for milk, and I'll come out with everything about milk, and I'm like, oh, motherfucker, I forgot. I have to go back in. Well, at this point, I had already left, and I was driving, and I was like, oh shit, I came here to
He
get
was
fucking
taken
garbage
directly
bags,
to
and I didn't.
Isabella.
So I
And
stopped
if
the
her
car,
treatment
and I
of
was
his
like, dude,
father
there's this
was
thing
any
called an El
indication,
Supra. What the fuck is that?
Despenser's
The
future
Super?
looked bleak.
Market, I guess. I walk in, it already smells like a Mexican store. Why? But it doesn't smell like an Asian store. What's a Mexican store in relation to an Asian store?
wear a crown of
Asian
nettles.
store smells like
Verses
old
from the Bible were cut into his chest, shoulders, and arms. The
seafood.
entire way, 2 squires blew bugle horns into his ears. Thousands of people gathered to celebrate
Sometimes it shouldn't have a
Dispenser's
smell. It shouldn't
downfall.
smell
And that
like anything.
was
But like,
only
there's a
the
lot of
beginning.
seafood in those places, and
Hugh Dispenser the Younger's so-called trial was held on November 24th,
Well, I'll just say I've only been
1326.
to one once.
After
99
being
cent
read a
minutes
laundry
record or
list of various
And-
accusations, he was sentenced to death.
Why the
When the
fuck did
judge
you go to
read the
one of those?
verdict, he
now
proclaimed,
that's a good question.
"Withdraw, you traitor,
I think I had gone
tyrant,
to the movies or
renegade.
something.
Go to your own justice, traitor,
Oh,
evil
no.
man,
I know what I did.
criminal."
Immediately
No, this is
after,
actually an interesting thing.
Dispenser was
I lived in
tied
Long
and
Beach,
dragged
and it was
by
so
4
hot
horses to Hereford
sometimes in
Castle,
the summer
where a 50-foot
that
execution
I
platform
would,
awaited him,
like, it would be the same
specially
here if I
built
didn't
for
have
the
air
occasion.
conditioning in the summer.
With Isabella
So what?
presumably
I would get in my
looking on,
car in the middle of the night and just
executioner
drive.
tied a noose
Now, I'm not
around
saying the middle of the night, but
Dispenser's
sometimes
neck.
it'd be like 10
But
o'clock at night,
Dispenser was
like
only
9 o'clock at night.
partially
And I
strangled.
remember I went there once.
Before he could die, he was lowered
And what?
onto a ladder, and his genitals were cut off. Then
Just
his
to see what
gut
it
was
was?
sliced open, and his heart was removed from his
Yeah, I
chest.
think I just
By
never been
then,
in
he
one.
was
And what was
assuredly
it?
dead.
Not a
But just
99
for
cent.
good measure,
99
he was
ranch.
beheaded too.
How the fuck?
Dispenser's
What
head
is
was
this thing?
placed atop London Bridge.
I
The rest of his body was separated
Oh,
into
is that- was it
quarters
H mark?
and sent to the country's next
Oh, it might
4
have been
largest
H mark.
cities.
Really?
We don't know if King Edward watched the
Yeah,
horrific
what, I think it was
execution.
an H mark.
However,
Really?
we do know that Henry of Lancaster
Anyway,
was present, and
was
since
one of those.
Edward was in Henry's
So it smelled
custody,
like fish? Yeah.
he may have
Why?
been forced to watch
they have
Hugh
fish there.
Dispenser's
But
gruesome
You don't want it
demise.
to smell like anything.
From
People should come in
Hereford,
and it shouldn't
King
smell like
Edward
that.
was taken to Henry's stronghold of
They've got like
Kenilworth
open
on
barrels
December
of
5th,
food that aren't
1326.
kosher. But if
Though
they
he was
put
treated
those
well,
barrels
he was still very much a
Flip them up
prisoner,
and have like
and
a
his
thing
fate
so
still
that you
had to
could
be
like.
decided.
Over the holidays, Isabella and her
So that it was
advisors
like a-
debated what to do about Edward.
How did they have
Although
it?
the rebellion's goal of removing Hugh Dispenser
Our
was
neighbors
achieved,
had one of those kind of
allowing
things, and I've seen
Edward
it
to
for horse
continue
food as well.
ruling
But
was
what?
out
Our
of the
neighbors,
question.
Just
they had
because Hugh
a.
Dispenser was gone, that didn't
used
mean
to-
another upstart noble
They used to
wouldn't
feed
replace him.
the animals
After all,
in our
Dispenser
neighborhood.
had taken
So
the
they
place
fed
of Edward II's former
squirrels and the
favorite,
birds.
Piers
And
Gaveston.
I would go over to their house,
Additionally, if
and
Edward retook the throne, he
when
would
they were on
likely do
vacation, and one
everything
of
in
my
his
jobs
power
was
to
to
punish his wife.
feed them.
However, no king of England had ever been
Birds
forcefully
and,
deposed by his own people. Isabella and Mortimer
Squirrels.
were in
So there was-
uncharted
They
waters.
had like peanuts for the
Ultimately,
squirrels,
they decided the
and it was
best
like in the
course of
chute,
action
and
was to
you like
compel the
open
king
it
to
and shoot,
abdicate
and
in
they
favor of
close it,
14-year-old
and
Prince Edward.
then you go and
But there
feed
was
the
still the question of how to make him do
animals, and
it.
then they
On
had bird
January
seed.
4th, 1327, Isabella
thing that-
returned to London for the first time in 2
Why?
years.
Because you just can't have
3 days
everybody
later,
putting their hands in
Parliament
fucking
met
barrels
to
and stuff.
discuss King
That's gonna
Edward's
fly in
fate.
America.
To
It's
Isabella's
just not.
surprise,
I'm sorry.
there wasn't much
What in the
popular
fuck are
sentiment
you
for
guys doing
deposing
at
him.
99 Ranch Market and
Although
those
Hugh
kind of fucking
Dispenser was
A lot of
wildly
places do this.
unpopular
Fucking
in court,
Sprouts
his
does
meddling
this.
didn't particularly
Trader
impact
Joe's?
the rank
No.
and file. But
They
Isabella
don't have
had
these
come too
open
far
barrels.
to stop now.
What else?
To
Oh, there
turn
was
the
another
tide in
some.
her favor, Isabella worked her social connections.
What's that?
She convinced multiple civil
like a farmer's
organizations
market.
and high-ranking clergymen to vote for Edward's deposition.
And to ensure their success, Isabella's
Any others?
allies
Yeah,
planted
we
men
brought
in the
one in
crowd
Fullerton as
to
well.
cheer for their proposal. The gambit worked.
It's called a
Parliament
farmer's market,
acquiesced to public opinion and approved of Edward's
which
removal.
isn't the farmer's
The
market.
announcement was met with raucous cheers.
With the matter settled, a delegation traveled to Kenilworth to break the
No.
news to King Edward. On January 21st, 1327, Edward's
Wait.
household steward destroyed his staff of office. The king's reign was officially at an end.
14-year-old Prince Edward's coronation took place on February 1st, 1327.
You want a mom
Although
beach?
it's unclear if Isabella
It's called-
attended,
it starts with
her
an H.
staunch
Harry's
ally Roger
Farmer's
Mortimer was
market,
there.
Henry's farmer's
He
market.
seems to have played a prominent role in the proceedings.
Since the young King Edward III was still a minor, he needed a regent to rule on his behalf until he turned 18. The honor went to his mother, Isabella, and unofficially Roger Mortimer, who was constantly by Isabella's side.
But just because there was a new Edward on the throne, that didn't mean the old one didn't still pose a threat.
Oh,
After
it's
he
not
was
a thing anymore?
deposed, Isabella and Roger Mortimer
Used as
decided to
operating platform in
transfer Edward
2011,
II
it started
into the
becoming part of
custody of
Sprouts
someone they
Farmers
could
Market.
fully trust. His
So,
new
okay, so
jailers
now
were to be
well,
Mortimer's
anyway,
son-in-law and
we were at one of
brother-in-law.
those. Oh, yeah,
Essentially,
that was an old
he was at
one.
Roger
So it became
Mortimer's
Sprouts?
mercy.
Yeah.
On
You like
April
Sprouts?
3rd,
A lot.
1327, Edward was
Really?
moved to Berkeley Castle.
Shout out to
As
this one
before,
girl.
he was
This
treated
one
with
time,
utmost
I
respect.
was at a Sprouts.
Records show
doing
that his
nothing wrong.
servants traveled with him, and he
In
was
fact,
well
I was
fed
waiting to
upon
get a job.
arriving.
Keeping
And
Edward happy and healthy was a good way to
I was
ensure
waiting
he didn't
on
try to agitate
someone
a rebellion of
on
his
the
own.
company. I had all the
But he
steps
wasn't
that
the
were done,
only challenge
and
Isabella faced.
I was just
There
waiting
was
on.
another foe waiting in the wings.
Like I
With
passed the
England
drug test, I
in the
passed the
middle of
background test,
unprecedented
I
political
passed
upheaval,
everything. I was just waiting on like
decided it was the perfect
official.
time to
You got
strike.
it.
King
And
Robert
what?
Bruce
I was
of
waiting in line at
Scotland.
Sprouts
Bruce was
And
a
I was
thorn in
not
Edward II's side
anywhere near
throughout
this
his
woman
entire reign,
at all.
and he was eager to test
And it was
Isabella's
during
resolve
COVID.
now that
And I had
she
my
was
mask
running
on, and she had her
things.
mask on,
It
and
was
her daughter had her mask
Isabella's
on.
first
Her
major
daughter was maybe,
test as a ruler in her own
and she
right,
and her daughter were like
and
6
it
feet away from me,
wouldn't be the last.
and I wasn't paying attention. And
Coming up, Isabella's
this woman's
leadership
like,
comes
and
under
I had like
pressure.
my
Now back to the
cart in
story.
front of me, and this woman's like,
Upon taking over as the regent of
do you think you could get any
King Edward
closer?
III,
And I'm like 6 feet
32-year-old
away.
Queen
Like,
Isabella
there's my cart in
secured her
3
position
fucking
by putting her
spots.
husband
It
in
was like,
Roger Mortimer's
I
custody.
just remember being like,
But almost
oh, I'm
immediately,
sorry, I did
the
not know.
former
I
Edward
was so
II
close to you.
wasn't the
And I
only
moved back.
challenger Isabella
So
had to
then
worry
that
about.
lady
With
walked in,
England's
and I was just
political
thinking about
situation still
this job,
disrupted,
and I would
King
eventually
Robert
get it.
Bruce of Scotland went on
But
the
how
offensive.
stressed I was at that time,
Edward
and
II
I
had
walked up to
failed
like
to
pay for
bring
my
Bruce
stuff, and
to
the lady
heel.
was
Now it
at
was
the
Isabella's
Sprouts
turn
person
to
working
deal with the
Sprouts was like,
pugnacious
that lady was so
Scottish
rude to
king.
you. I'm so sorry
On
that you
June
were like that. I don't know what her problem was.
1327,
You were
Bruce
absolutely
invaded
fine,
England.
and you were
Roger Mortimer
the
rode
total
north to the
normal
realm's defense with the young
space that
King
everyone
Edward
is
III
like. I'm here all day long.
It
That's
was
where
a
you stand is where
complete
everyone
and
stands,
total
and no one has an
disaster.
issue. I don't know what her
Bruce's
issue is.
forces
So she was just a
overwhelmed
really
the
nice
English,
really,
and
yeah.
Edward III was almost captured.
Making
And I
matters
remember people
worse,
who were working there
Edward II's
were
remaining
accomplished
allies
individuals. I mean,
seized the
I
opportunity to
remember
try and free him from
not that
Berkeley
person,
Castle.
somebody else.
Though
They
there
were.
weren't many of
I
them,
mean,
they
it's
were
kind of
still
how it is nowadays.
fiercely
But
devoted
they're
to their
they're
former
working
king
their way through school,
and wanted
doing
him
some other.
back on
Anyway,
the throne.
they'd understand. You can't have
Sometime
open
in
barrels
mid to
because
late
people
June
will
of
spit in that,
1327,
or they'll sneeze
a
and all
small
other
group
kinds
of
of shit.
loyalists, led by brothers Thomas and Stephen
But you
Dunheved,
can do like
infiltrated Berkeley Castle.
that.
Somehow, they
If it has
evaded the
gravity
guards,
taking it
grabbed the
downwardly,
former king,
then
and
fine.
escaped into
Well,
the
how do you get
surrounding
it? Like
countryside.
if it,
Unfortunately,
if
it's not
somebody did it
clear
and
what
it
happened to Edward II during this time. His escape was an extremely sensitive issue,
falls,
and there's almost no correspondence referring to it.
it could have like.
However, it seems like he was back in Barclay's custody by July
It's
27,
like a stable.
1327,
Anything that falls
and by the
goes in
fall,
there.
the rest
I
of
don't
the
know, it's like
Dunheved
a
gang was either captured, killed, or in hiding.
The Dunheved plot was only one of several attempts to free Edward II. It was clear that as long as Edward lived, he would be a threat, and there was only one way to ensure those escape attempts stopped.
Farmers
On
Market.
September 21st, 1327, Edward II died.
ROTHSCHILD comes
When Isabella learned of her husband's death on September 24th, she was told he died of natural causes.
However, it seems like nobody really believed it. Many suspected that Roger Mortimer and possibly Isabella herself had orchestrated Edward
Did
II's
they
death.
move it?
Unfortunately, there's no record of how
I
Isabella
don't even know where
reacted
it
to her
is.
husband's passing, but she seems to have behaved as a grieving widow was expected
Oh, it's
to.
Bush Plaza.
However, she never visited his body while it lay in state at Gloucester Cathedral.
Whatever Isabella's involvement was in her husband's death, she and King Edward III were
Why?
present
They've got
at
this fucking
Edward
commercial
II's
of me
funeral
throwing a
on
tire
December
through their
20th,
fucking window,
1327.
and they've had it there
Also in
for like,
attendance was Roger
they've
Mortimer,
had the same
who
fucking
wore a
discount
black
tire
robe specifically tailored for the
since the
occasion.
70s.
But he probably wasn't
Never
overly upset to see the former
Never
monarch
changed
buried.
it. Portillo's hot dogs would be
Edward II's
Cheddars
death
would be
paved the way for Roger Mortimer to exert
hot
more
dogs.
influence on the
They have
kingdom.
hot dogs.
Over the
Shop of
previous
hot dogs.
year,
Who worked there?
Mortimer had
Laurel
gathered
worked at
whatever
hot
lands
dogs.
and
They have a
titles he
Raisin
could.
Canes. They
He
have
built
crumbler
up
cookies.
extensive
They got all
holdings in
kinds of stuff.
Wales, especially
Corral.
those
They
formerly
got a
belonging
Sonic,
to
kid.
Hugh Despenser the Younger.
They
it
got
is
a
Allah's.
Chipotle.
History
a
was
Culver.
repeating itself.
But god damn it,
Throughout Edward II's reign, he came under
They're an
fire
awful-
for giving his favored companions
They had a
preferential
fucking
treatment. Now, Isabella
Carter's
was doing the
curbside
same thing for Roger
children's
Mortimer.
clothing
Not to
store.
mention, Isabella's record against the
Fresh
Scottish
Time
was
Market.
even worse than
Damn,
her
bitch, you
husband.
finding everything.
After the failed campaign in
And
early
it's not Fresh Time Market.
1327,
So they had a thing.
Isabella
What
ended
was there?
England's attempts
What
to
did they
conquer
have
the
there?
Scots.
On May 4th,
I like this
1328,
place.
the Treaty of
But
Northampton
what
was
they had?
ratified.
They had
England officially
chocolate
renounced
covered
all claims to
cherries
Scotland
and blueberries.
and acknowledged
I
Robert
love chocolate
Bruce
covered
as its rightful
Oh,
king.
yeah, chocolate.
It was not
These were different
received
kinds.
well in
There's,
England.
there's chocolate
The
covered cherries
treaty
that come
became
in
known
like
as the Shameful Peace.
Even more embarrassingly, Isabella
Edmonds?
betrothed her daughter Joan
Edmonds
to
sampler?
Bruce's son, David.
Edmonds?
Their marriage ensured that there was
Whitman.
more than a piece of paper
Whitman
maintaining
sampler.
peace between the two countries. There was blood.
Edmonds is the end of that aisle.
Meanwhile, across the channel,
They
Isabella
have, like,
was
the,
also meddling in French affairs, and with
Whitman
little
sampler.
success. Earlier in 1328, her brother, King Charles IV of France, passed away. With no immediate heirs, the throne went to Charles and Isabella's cousin, Philip of Valois.
However, Edward III had a better claim to the French throne since he was
And
Charles's
it's Whitman
nephew
sampler.
and was his
Everybody
closest
knows
male
this fucking
relative. At
Why?
Isabella's urging, an envoy
It
was
has a
sent to
map in
France
it.
on
It
May
tells you like
16,
what is what. My grandfather used to
1328 to
love.
press Edward's claim.
But
He'd eat
because
one
Edward's
and then
claim went to his mother, the
he
French
wouldn't know.
ultimately
He'd
decided on
find like I want to find a coconut one. Find a coconut one and he'd eat it and make sure it like matched up.
The French probably didn't want to be ruled by an English king.
Isabella's former
Really?
diplomatic
Yeah, and I used to
triumphs
like
were
rose
a
at the
thing
same.
of the past, and back home, things were
But what did you
continuing
guys
to
like?
spiral out of
Chocolate covered
control.
cherries. So
At
we
the
used to get
meeting
him
of
chocolate
Parliament
covered cherries.
in
That was his
October
favorite.
1328,
Yeah.
Roger Mortimer
And
made himself
we'd eat
the
so many
Earl of
chocolate covered
March.
cherries, we'd get
This gave
sick
him
of them.
control over all the
And
land along the English-Welsh border.
The
Can you?
unprecedented
I
power
don't get
grab
sick
didn't
on
go over well
pure
with the
protein,
other
but I will
lords,
get sick of that sugar.
particularly Henry
So
of
I can eat
Lancaster.
steak every
He had
single day
joined
for years.
Isabella's
But I
rebellion
can
to
only
regain
eat
some of the
chocolate covered
lands
cherries
Edward
till
II
14.
took from him, which included territory along the Welsh border.
Yeah.
But Mortimer's power grab only further diminished his influence. So in response, Henry launched his own rebellion against Isabella and Mortimer.
Just like
So there's
when
that kind of
Henry's brother
chocolate
had
covered
rebelled
cherry.
against Edward
So they
II
had
and
this other
Leo
kind
Dispenser.
that was like
Several of Isabella
like,
and Roger Mortimer's key allies joined his side. They all had one
they
thing
didn't
in
have all the
common.
shit. It was just
They
literally
had
a
a
cherry.
bone to pick with the Queen's favorite
Which is
advisor.
I like both
Throughout
of them.
November and
Never
December
met a
of
chocolate covered cherry that
1328, the two sides played
But
a game
when
of
my
diplomatic
and
cat and
Nancy dies,
mouse,
she says,
and by the
I
new
was
year,
on my
the
grave.
two
I
sides
never met a
finally
restaurant.
clashed on the
Really? Yeah.
battlefield.
Details
Really?
of what happened are hazy.
She
But
likes
one
everything.
chronicler wrote
I've
that
been
in
told
January
before. I've never gone to a
1329,
restaurant.
Mortimer
Been
besieged
like
the city
that
of
place.
Leicester over the course of 8
Really,
days.
I like all the restaurants.
Another
that are
source
there.
wrote that
Why?
Isabella participated in a battle in
Well, I
Bedford,
don't go to random
adorned
places
as a
to be
knight
like,
armed.
I'm gonna just
Whenever
try this
viewing
fucking place out.
happened, the result was the same.
I would like to tell
On
you that I
February
have that
9th,
kind of
1329,
money to be able to
Henry
be
of
like, oh, I
Lancaster
just try out all kinds of
officially
places, you know.
surrendered.
I
He agreed to
would,
pay a huge fine of
I used to,
£30,000, which was almost 3 times more than his deceased brother, who had been the richest man of England, made in a year.
Look, man,
Although
you
Henry
gotta
was
be able to
subdued,
beat like a
as soon
20
as his
piece mix,
rebellion
like the
ended,
chicken for
someone
me,
else
or
started
20 piece
plotting
chicken
against the
nugget
Queen,
for me to want to go
her
to wherever you are.
own son.
Like if a place is like, oh yeah, we've got chicken.
By early
It's like, okay,
1329,
is it
Edward
such good
III
chicken
was 16
that it has
years
its
old.
own
He had been on the throne for 2 years
like
and didn't appreciate the
surname
control his
thing at
mother
the
and
front?
Roger Mortimer had
What do you
over his
call one of
kingdom's
those?
affairs. They had driven the realm into ruin. When they took over in 1326, the royal treasury contained nearly 80,000 British pounds. By late 1330, that sum was down to a paltry 40.
Does your chicken have a
If things
prefix?
continued as they were, Edward III could face a legitimate rebellion of his own.
Edward
Like,
III sent a close
they
advisor
thought
to
it
the
should
Pope
have that.
with
That
a
should
letter
be a fucking.
written in Edward's own hand. It was a
McDonald's
sort of
was like for
cipher that
McChickens,
allowed the
or
Pope to
well, it
compare
could be
the
that
king's
too.
handwriting to
McChickens
any
or
future letters.
McNuggets.
If
It's
they
just
didn't
at
match
McDonald's.
Edward's
Does
handwriting,
your
that meant
chicken
they
have a
were probably
prefix? Why?
sent by
Because they do
Isabella
like
or Roger Mortimer.
who
More
Chick-fil-A?
importantly, this
They
letter
don't.
indicated
What
that
is
Edward
what do you call
III
it? Chick-fil-A
wanted to
thing?
rule on his own.
I don't know.
But
What are
freeing
they called?
himself
Like
from Isabella and Mortimer's shackles
Are they
wouldn't
called
be
Chick-fil-A?
easy.
Chick-fil-A?
If he tried to raise
What
an
do you
army
call
against
Chick-fil-A
them,
chicken
it
nugget?
could plunge the
Chick-fil-A
country
nuggets?
into a bloody civil war.
And unlike Isabella, he didn't have the luxury of gathering forces from another continent. If Edward III was going to
Yeah,
overthrow
they
his
need to be.
regents, he had to do it
They need a better
covertly.
name for it.
Unfortunately,
Oh, that one went down?
Mortimer was too well connected, and at some point he caught wind of the king's
What do you want to call
plans.
them?
In early October
Chick-fil-A
1330,
nuggets. Well, that's a
Mortimer
fucking.
questioned the king's closest
You call them
allies,
nuggets.
but
I said
none of
Chick-fil-A
them
nuggets.
betrayed
Chick-fil-A nuggets.
Their refusal
said
to
nuggets.
turn on the king gave
Chick-fil-A
Isabella and Mortimer
Chick-fil-A
cause for
nuggets.
concern. Perhaps
It's not
the
what it sounded
tide
like to
was
me.
turning against them. Ahead of a mid-October meeting of Parliament, they took shelter in Nottingham Castle.
Hey,
Isabella
Hey,
was so afraid of
Chick-fil-A
getting attacked,
nugget.
she personally held on to the castle's keys.
She was right to be worried. One of
Are
her
you
son's
done?
allies was familiar with the castle's layout.
Hey,
He
Chick-fil-A
told
nugget.
Edward about a secret
We did it
tunnel
again.
that led into
Maybe
the
they should
fortress.
call them niggets. Really?
On October
This is
19th,
easy.
1330,
But then they brand
the
them.
king
Then it's
and a
like,
group of
oh, what
knights
kind of nuggets? Like,
infiltrated
I can just tell you,
Nottingham Castle
oh my
under
God,
the
I
cover
love
of
McNuggets.
darkness.
And people, everyone on earth
Evading the
who
guards,
has ever
they
seen the
made it all the
television
way to
or
Isabella's
been
chambers
outside in
undetected.
America has been like, oh,
Edward likely
I
heard
know
his
what he
mother
means.
meeting with her counselors.
Companies
No
should just
doubt
do it. Like,
Roger
oh yeah,
Mortimer
niggas.
loudly
Niggas
stated
are
his
fucking
opinion on whatever
Chick-fil-A.
matter they were discussing.
Or
The
nags.
king
Chick-fil-A.
steeled
But I
himself.
like niggets. Why?
This was the time to
Well, it
take
reminds me of
control
niggins.
of his
Niggins
kingdom.
are
Edward and his men
things that you
burst
sing in
through the door,
Judaism. They're like,
swords drawn.
what's a
Mortimer
nigger?
and his men tried to fight back, but the intruding knights overpowered them.
Oh, I actually knew niggins really, really well. Would you sing a niggin?
And a fourth was
Um,
captured
oh my
while
God.
trying to escape through a
I
latrine.
love these. My friend
Roger
will have to.
Mortimer was
What
bound
would
and
be
gagged,
one?
while Isabella was kept under guard in her chambers.
Wait, what are they?
Isabella's
There's like this
brief,
one that we would
chaotic
do at
reign
shul.
was over. In a matter of minutes,
What was
a
it?
handful of men had
It
overthrown
was
the
like-
kingdom.
What would you guys do?
Like Hugh Dispenser before him,
So
Mortimer's
You
trial
can't
was a
say
sham.
anything after
Held
hand
on
washing,
November
but
25th,
you can like hum
1330,
niggins.
He was
So it
accused
would
of
be like
14 crimes, including the murder of King Edward II. He was found guilty
I forget
and
exactly what it was.
sentenced to death.
But it was a lot of
4
fun.
days later,
Yeah.
Mortimer was
Why?
forced to don the black robe he wore to Edward II's
Because
funeral
my friend
and was taken to
and I would
gallows
always kick
outside
them
of
off.
London.
These niggins.
Before
Really?
he was
Yeah.
executed, he was
But I
stripped
can't
naked
remember exactly
and
what they
read
are.
the same Bible verse that had been carved into Hugh Dispenser's skin. Then he
I
was
have
hanged by the
to
neck
fucking
until he died.
run them down.
In a small mercy, Mortimer was spared the
Come on.
horrific execution
Nice
Hugh Dispenser
niggins.
had to
How
suffer.
does this have to do with
But the
Chick-fil-A?
message was clear.
I understand.
Like Dispenser, Mortimer had far exceeded his authority and paid the price for it.
Meanwhile,
Remember Chick-fil-A?
Isabella escaped any major punishment. Unlike the strained relationship between the
So
queen
what's
and her
niggin?
husband, she and Edward III
it's a-
remained on amicable
It's like
terms.
a little song that
Rather
doesn't.
than blame
It's
his
like
mother,
an instrumental.
young
I guess.
Edward used
No, it's
Roger
like an
Mortimer as a
acapella.
scapegoat for the kingdom's
Hum.
troubles.
However, 35-year-old
There's no
Isabella's days
instruments,
in the
just a
English
hum without
court
words.
were at an end. She went
What is
into
it?
what amounted
A
to an
wordless
early
fricative or
retirement,
some shit like
spending
that?
most of her time
Hey,
in
what's up,
northern
Club Four
England.
Minutes
She
Stadium?
watched on as Edward III
Correct stadium
restated his
thing.
claim to the
Would
French
you let
throne in 1337, kicking off the conflict known as the 100 Years' War, though in reality,
How much is a
it
12 pack?
lasted even longer than a century.
Don't believe it. Why? Because prices.
When Isabella
When you start
died
learning
in
that prices
1358
fluctuate
at
in
63
the world
years old,
at
there were
McDonald's,
still 94
What?
years of fighting on the horizon.
they don't have the
It
same
seemed that
shit here.
Edward III
You guys are
learned
getting
from his
fucked.
mother's
No one
example.
wants to live in a big
50
city.
years
McDonald's is this
earlier,
expensive.
Isabella's wedding had cemented peace between England and France. She was expected to produce heirs
Dude,
and
shit,
ensure that
McDonald's
peace
should come out with
persisted
a
throughout the
30 pack
ages.
or a 50.
However,
Oh, they used to come out with a 50 pack or something. Hold on a second. They did. Or they used to have a deal, two 20 packs. That's what it was. They had a deal in Pawnee. Two 20 packs are $5 or
It
something.
may
And
have
two
been
20
one of
20 packs for
conflict,
10.
war, and death, but in the end, it was hers.
No, they did have a 50-pack. How did you know this? I think I just heard about it. Truthfully, I've never had one. Really? No. Oh my god. Party pack?
Among
I've
the many
seen that
sources we
somewhere
used
a
for
long
these
time ago.
episodes, we found
Really? Yeah.
Isabella of France, the Rebel Queen by Catherine
48,
Horner
48
extremely
minutes?
helpful to our research.
You can find all episodes of Dictators and all other podcast
This is what it
originals
is.
for free on Spotify. Not
Hold on,
only does
50
Spotify
McNuggets.
already
I think
all
I
your
have
favorite music,
maybe
but
some
now
more.
Spotify is making it
Really?
easy for you to enjoy all of your favorite podcast originals like
How do
Dictators
you
for
think
free
I know
from your
about
phone,
their fucking
desktop, or
secret
smart
menu,
speaker.
man?
To
Oh yeah, I
stream
got a
Dictators
50
on
pack. Yours is
Spotify,
like,
just open the app
It's
and type
like-
Dictators in the search bar.
And don't
it's
forget
like a
to follow us on
toolkit.
Facebook and
It's like a
Instagram
little
at
toolkit.
Parcast and Twitter at Parcast Network. We'll see you next time.
No, but
Dictators
they have
was
these-
created by
man,
Max Cutler and
I
is a
want-
Parcast
what's it
Studios
called?
original.
What's
It
that
is
shit called?
executive produced by Max
Canceled
Cutler,
or like
sound designed by Dick Schroeder,
canceled
with
McDonald's
production assistance by Ron Shapiro, Carly Madden, and Joshua Kern.
menu items?
This episode of Dictators was written by Alex Benedon, with writing assistance by Kate Gallagher, and stars Kate Leonard and Richard Rossner.
All right,
Hi, listeners. Before
McLobster.
we go,
That was
I
on the
hope you remember
Canadian
to check
thing.
out the new Parcast
But,
original
yeah.
series, Medical Murders. Every Wednesday, meet the worst the medical community has to offer. Men and women who took an oath to save
After some
lives,
supply issues
but
and effective living
instead
probably
use their
Here's the thing
expertise
with
to
the thing
develop
with the,
more
the shrimp,
sinister
they like put out
specialties.
all the
Follow
solid
Medical
shaker fish.
Murders free on
Really, yeah.
Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts.
Garden chef and grilled chicken Caesar options. And yes, we were basically selling them coming 3 years of pork sauce. They just allegedly. The McDLT.
December 11th,
What's that?
1474.
McDLT.
High atop the
It
Alcazar
was.
fortress in Madrid,
They
King
had
Enrique
a
IV was dying. The King of Castile had been
special
battling an
container that
unknown
kept the patty
illness for
separated from
nearly a
resin
year,
tomato. The result
and his
was that the
condition
patty stayed hot,
rapidly
while the
deteriorated.
resin tomato stayed crisp and cold. The way of
He
burger
knew
shakes.
death was near, so he began to finalize his
Okay.
affairs. Jewels were to be sold to pay off his
McDLT,
debts,
the first
and he
there
wanted
was
to
a
be
custom
buried
container
next to his
designed to
mother.
keep
But
hot
the
and cold
topic
parts of
on
the burger
everyone's
separate
mind
until you were ready
who
to
would
eat.
inherit the
So
kingdom.
one section had lettuce and
At
tomato, the
2
other part
a.m.,
pancreas, so
Enrique closed his
nothing else. Like
eyes
a good idea in
and
theory, but
never
apparently it
opened
didn't
them
work out.
again.
Environmental
And
concerns,
with his
polystyrene
last breath,
packaging discontinued.
the heir to the
That was the
throne
thing. That
was still in
polystyrene,
question.
that shit was
Would it be
everywhere. They
Enrique's
had fucking
daughter Juana or his
hot cakes
half-sister
cream in that shit.
Isabella?
Chicken selects,
When
huge.
Isabella learned
This
of
is for what I was
Enrique's
looking at.
death,
A fancier
she
version
knew
of
that
McNuggets.
this was her
Chicken
chance
selects
to
were bigger
seize
and
the
looked
throne.
different. They didn't go
For
well.
too long, she
And
had
taken
been
on the
seen as
menu in
nothing more
2015.
than a bargaining chip for others.
They were on it
It
that
was
long.
now her
Since
time
they've been
to
brought
rule.
back,
And she was
Eggs
more
Benedict
than willing
McMuffin.
to plunge
Never heard of
Castile
it.
into
That sounds
war if it
2016.
meant taking
Why?
the
Because
crown.
I haven't eaten. I hadn't eaten it maybe ever, but definitely hasn't been since 2016. Like definitely. I was in one once because I had to go to the bathroom before
Welcome to
I
Dictators, a Parcast original. I'm Richard.
And I'm Kate.
an interview.
You can find all
Really?
episodes
Where
of
I look like the
Dictators and
most
all other
Jewish
Parcast
motherfucker ever.
originals for free
I make
on
mush,
Spotify
Rabbi Moshe
or
Feinstein
wherever
look
you
like
listen to podcasts.
Coleman.
To stream Dictators for free on Spotify, just open
Alright,
the
have you
app
done?
and type
According to
Dictators
Eater,
in
there
the
was no
search bar.
poached egg. Although it did have hollandaise sauce and around it. I'm sorry, it didn't like it. Mick Jordan, Michael Jordan's candy morning. Does the Mick Jordan search cake? Raw onions, pickled bacon, barbecue, custom ordered cheeseburgers from the bacon dealer in the 90s.
During her time as
It will
queen,
never feel the
she
same.
helped create
Circular
what is
bacon.
today modern Spain.
What is this?
She also kicked off the
McDonald's
age of
British
discovery by financing Christopher
Fruit and
Columbus's
walnut
maiden
salad?
voyages.
They don't still have that? Bitch?
However, what many don't
It's
know
probably not
is that
chicken. It's discontinued
Isabella,
in
a
2013.
fierce proponent
Mighty
of
Wings, that was a
Catholicism,
thing.
initiated
Like,
a
these were
bloody
really good.
program to purge
Panda chicken
heretics
chicken
from
mighty
the
ones with
kingdom.
bone.
She was
And
one of
chicken
the
wings.
leading
They're good.
architects of the Spanish Inquisition, the 300-year
Gets in the way
period of
of when you
religious
swallow.
genocide that saw thousands of Jews,
Alright, get rid of that chicken
Muslims,
wings
and
or the
suspected
daily
heretics
Fish
tortured and
McBites.
murdered,
Never.
and all in the name of
Filet of
Catholicism.
fish doesn't sound appetizing.
This
to me.
week,
Wrong with
we'll
it.
explore
Filet
Isabella's
of fish becomes
unlikely
really
rise to the throne of Castile, and how upon taking power, she did what no man was
All
able to
McDonald's is the world's only sold
reclaim
filet of fish
Granada
on
from the
Fridays.
Moors.
Next week, we'll dive into her role as
Until
one
one
of the
day
main
we were
proponents of the Spanish
Allegedly there, and I
Inquisition,
saw somebody had a
Columbus's
burger. And I was
famous
like, Mom, look,
1492
look. And
voyage,
she's
and
like,
her
yeah,
battle
get
to
out.
secure her legacy through her children.
Chicken fajitas, no, those are big. Really?
Coming
They
up,
were.
we'll explore the rise of Isabella
What were they?
I of Castile.
Szechuan sauce becomes really big.
15th century
No,
Europe
were
was
they
almost
big? Yeah, these
entirely
ones are great.
dominated by men.
Why?
They were
Chickpea is a great
kings,
question. Chickpea is
emperors,
in breakfast
popes,
burritos in the
and
90s.
sultans.
Breakfast
When a
burritos were really
woman
big.
did
The big
become
and tasty
queen,
becomes really big.
rarely did it mean
Really?
wielding
Big and
power.
tasty was amazing.
Instead, she was
Really?
merely a
Yeah.
figurehead
Big and
that
tasty was
bound
supposed to be
kingdoms
like
and
a King
families
Whopper
together.
burger. It was a
The
seasoned
Christian
quarter pounder beef
kingdoms on
that
the
also got ketchup,
Iberian
mayonnaise,
Peninsula,
onions, pickles,
Castile,
mozzarella.
Aragon, and
Wonderful.
Portugal were no
Really?
different.
Arch Deluxe
In
becomes
fact,
really big.
since the fall
It
of
was
the Roman
gourmet.
Empire,
It was
only
huge.
2 women
It had
held power in what is now called
it was an
Spain.
adult hamburger.
Against
Chopped
this
beef steak
backdrop,
sandwich. Never heard of it.
Isabella of Castile
What is it?
wasn't
It's
supposed to be
1979.
queen,
I
and
knew
if
it was steak
European
sauce.
royal society
McHot
wasn't
dog
already
comes
an
back.
obstacle on the
Really?
road
Yeah,
to the crown,
McHot dog.
the nature of
Does
her
your
birth
fucking
set the tone of things to come.
so then Burger King needs a fucking prefix. What would it be?
Unlike most royal births, Isabella's didn't receive the jubilation that
They
was
could call
standard
it
for
O.
princes or
Like
princesses.
Battlefest.
In fact, her father,
Shit.
King Juan II
The
of
O
Castile,
Whopper.
made
Really?
only a cursory announcement
That's
that
about
at
the only way
end
you're gonna
of
beat 'em.
April
Or the I Whop,
1451,
maybe an I.
he now
No,
had a
like an O.
daughter.
Much of
What
this
would it be?
was
Like
because
an O
when
Whopper,
Isabella was
O
born,
chicken
she was
salad, O
automatically
chicken
second in
sandwich,
line to the throne.
and like
Despite
onion rings
her
are
mother
already
being
O
the
rings,
queen,
so that
an
kind of
heir
already
had
works.
already been chosen.
Why?
Isabella's
Because then it'd be
half-brother,
like they do
Enrique
have a
IV
prefix.
of
Yeah, we
Castile.
do. It's O. We don't
Enrique
even have
was
to
in
call
his
it chicken nuggets.
mid-20s in 1451 and already married. It was only a matter of time before he continued the line of
These
succession
niggins.
with children of his own.
Really?
When Isabella was 2, her younger brother
A triple
Alfonso
double
was
burger.
born. Because he
Grandma's
was
Forever
male,
superhero
he
burger.
automatically superseded Isabella
2 slices
and
of
pushed
cheese,
her to third in line.
2 beef pads, 3 beef
Destiny was
pads,
relegating Isabella to the sideline.
onion nuggets. Huh?
Isabella wasn't going to have a normal
Vegas
childhood,
burger.
even by medieval standards. In 1454, her father died, meaning Enrique was now king. Isabella's mother sank into a deep depression that
I remember
all
seeing that in Chicago,
incapacitated her,
but we were
making
never
it
there.
impossible for her to care for Isabella
I
or
remember being
Alfonso.
there.
Instead,
because
young
sisters make
Isabella and
only
Alfonso ended up in the
US of
care
A,
of their
one in Ohio,
Portuguese
and the other
grandmother in the
West
town of Arevalo, about 40 miles
Damn.
from Segovia.
During this period, Isabella received an education befitting a princess. She learned to
Grandma
read
said
and
pizza
write,
is still in
became
process.
versed in
The pizza
Spanish,
took 11 minutes to
Portuguese,
prepare.
Italian, and
Way
French,
too long.
studied history and
Hot
philosophy,
mustard
and
sauce.
became an avid
Remember
reader.
that. Allegedly.
But the most important discovery during her childhood was religion. Catholicism, essentially the only Western Christian religion at the time, became her foundation and encompassed
Remember
all
that?
aspects of her life. Isabella found special inspiration
Mulan
in
Szechuan
the
sauce.
recently martyred
That would be
Joan
a big
of Arc.
thing. Really? Yeah.
Joan of Arc had been executed 20 years before Isabella was born.
People are still obsessed with
But in
that.
the early
Spanish omelet
1450s,
bagel.
Joan's
Oh
trial
yeah.
was
What did they have? They had these
reevaluated
fucking
in her
grills were
favor.
really big.
Soon,
And
she
they had
became
these
known as a
fucking- I gotta
religious
tell this
icon throughout Europe. And for
What was
Isabella,
it?
prime example of how one ought to fight for Christ.
Isabella knew that she would never go into battle herself, believing that combat was reserved only for men. However, Joan's militant devotion
McStuffins?
left a lasting
What's
effect
that?
on Isabella.
McStuffins? Hot pocket? Oh my god. Calzones? Mixed spaghetti? Oh.
In
What's that?
1461,
What was
10-year-old
Fazoli's
Isabella and 7-year-old
Ooh, a
Alfonso
I
were
thought they
forced
still
to
made
leave
this.
their grandmother
Pineapple?
and live with their half-brother, King Enrique, and his wife, Queen Juana. The reason for the decision? To keep potential threats to his power nearby.
By now, King Enrique had earned the nickname the Impotent, since he had not
Literally
produced
just
an
grilled
heir,
pineapple on a bun
male
with cheese.
or female. Some in
Strawberry
the court
shortcake
began
with
to
flurry.
question if Enrique was even capable of
It was
procreating.
mixed soup.
So when the
Oh,
queen
yeah.
suddenly became pregnant in
Really?
1461,
Yeah.
many didn't believe that Enrique was the real
Did they?
father.
There was chicken noodle
These
soup.
rumors scared Enrique. Isabella or Alfonso could use them to declare
Sweet
his
chili
child's
sauce.
claim to the throne as
That's a thing.
illegitimate and take power for
Son of
themselves.
Mac.
Thus, Enrique decided to
The
keep his
McBeast.
perceived enemies even closer.
He took Isabella from her grandmother
Hot and spicy
and made her
chicken.
a
Now that's a
lady in
thing.
waiting to
Right?
Queen
Yeah.
Juana. And although Isabella likened the queen to an evil stepmother. Her time at the palace became a crash
It's the
course
fucking same
in
shit,
courtly
just a little
life.
spicier.
The parties, the
Alright,
jousts,
all
and the
those things
sexual
come back.
politics played
If you had
among
to bring back
kings,
one of them, what would
queens, and courtiers.
It was a total culture shock for the virtuous Catholic princess.
What one would come back
Worse
would
yet,
make the most
not long after Isabella moved to court,
for that company?
Enrique started looking for a foreign nobleman to marry Isabella. He needed alliances, and his half-sister was a valuable bargaining chip.
Well, they have some of those
Enrique
things.
initially
Probably.
hoped to pawn Isabella off to
Well,
their
they have
cousin
like
in the
breakfast
east,
burrito.
Prince
I don't know.
Carlos of
I don't go
Aragon.
there, and I haven't been there in
But Carlos suddenly
since I
died,
fucking had to go there
forcing
for fucking.
Enrique to look elsewhere.
I didn't have a job
Enrique
interview. Yeah, I
knew
had a
he
job
needed
interview
to
on the
act
street.
quickly.
But I had to go to the
His
bathroom.
popularity among the people
I
was
just want to walk and say, I gotta go to the bathroom.
Throughout Castile, murder, assault, and robbery were suddenly on the rise. And with each passing
what?
day, the
What did you
idea
have?
of swearing loyalty to a
didn't have
potentially
Out of the
illegitimate
things you just
heir
read, what
sickened
would
many
be the
nobles.
one thing
The two
that they could bring
leaders
back
of the descent were
blow it
men
out of
who
the
were
water?
actually close to the king, Alfonso Carrillo da Cunha, Archbishop of Toledo, and Juan Pacheco, the Marqués of Villena. Both had their own private grievances with Enrique, but the common
probably
thread
the
was that he had become
big
a weak
and
and ineffectual
Really?
leader
Well,
and
hold on.
needed to be replaced.
That's incorrect.
Both cast
They
their
used to
eyes
sell
on
the big and
Isabella's
tasty for
11-year-old
$1,
brother,
which is
Alfonso.
very, very cheap.
In June 1465, the nobleman snatched Alfonso from Enrique's
So
court
the salad
and
shaker is
openly
the best
declared
idea out of all of these because
Castile
it got
for King
it got
Alfonso.
dressing
And
on
with that,
100% basic
Castile
paper
was
stuff.
suddenly
It was
thrown
great.
into civil war. King
With
Enrique,
DLT,
looking to keep his crown,
chicken
and
selects,
Alfonso,
eggs
hoping to
Benedict
steal it.
McMuffin wasn't soft. Jordan.
For the next 3 years, the war consumed
Fighting wings?
Castile. And for Isabella, who was forced to stay Queen One, whoever won would dictate who she would marry, which alliances would be solidified.
Early on, both sides were locked in a stalemate, but in August 1467, fortune suddenly swung in Alfonso's favor at the Second Battle of Olmedo. Though both sides declared victory, 13-year-old Alfonso's valiant fighting inspired many Castilian noblemen to switch their support to him. A month later, Alfonso set his sights on Segovia, about 60 miles north of Madrid. Expecting yet another long battle, perhaps even a siege, Alfonso was shocked when the city's leaders opened their gates. Segovia, an important trading city, had fallen to the young usurper.
I think it's
Her
really
fate
like
now in the hands of her younger brother, 16-year-old Isabella was forced to choose a side, Enrique or Alfonso.
Isabella was never close to
Did you see
Enrique.
this one?
He had always seen her as a potential threat to his
Hey,
power.
Bojack.
And even though Isabella wasn't considered an equal by the men backing Alfonso, at least she and Alfonso were personally close.
The choice was easy. She backed Alfonso.
The choice was everything Isabella could have hoped for. Not only did Alfonso reunite Isabella with their mother at the end of the year, but Isabella made the acquaintance of Gonzalo Fernandez de Cordoba.
Cordoba belonged to a prominent family in Castile that had supported Alfonso since the start of the Civil War. He and Isabella forged such a tight bond that in no time at all, he pledged his undying loyalty to her.
That's the version that
She did
don't
the same.
take the test drive that people
But
drink,
the
don't speak.
reunion
I
between
did
brother and
understand
sister
why.
was cut short.
I think it's the best I've
In July 1468, 14-year-old Alfonso died of an unconfirmed illness. Some historians believe that he was stricken with the plague. Others theorize that he may have been poisoned by his enemies.
The death of Alfonso was a crushing blow for Isabella. Not only did she lose her closest ally, but once again, she was stuck in the company of men who only saw her as a political pawn.
Both of the war's instigators, Carrillo and Pacheco, wanted Isabella to declare herself queen and continue the civil war. While she was trying to grieve her brother's death, Isabella was faced with one of the most consequential decisions of her young life.
Call a truce with Enrique, or usurp him and become Queen of Castile.
Coming up, A secret marriage paves the way for the future of Spain. Hi, it's Kate. From trauma surgeons to hospice staff, we all know that medical professionals are trained to give exceptional care. But what about those who use their skills not to heal, but hurt? In the new podcast series, Medical Murders, you'll discover a disturbing diagnosis that not every doctor wants to extend your life. Every Wednesday, Medical Murders introduces you to the worst the medical community has to offer. Men and women who took an oath to save lives, but instead use their expertise to develop more sinister specialties. Join my dear friend, host Alistair Burton, as he examines the formative years and motives of history's most infamous killers, dissecting their medical backgrounds with expert analysis and professional insight provided by practicing MD Dr. David Kipper. You'll investigate a wide range of heinous healthcare workers, like the general practitioner believed to be the most prolific serial killer in modern history, or the dentist who led a double life as a hitman, or even the doctor and gang member who leads to deadly potions for unhappy housewives to use on their husbands. When it comes to these true crime stories, the only thing the doctor ordered is murder. Follow Medical Murders free on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts.
Oh my god, you messed up on all of these.
Now, back to
Luna
the story.
Overville. Oh my god. So we fucked
In
up
July
on every single
1468, 17-year-old
I thought it
Isabella
was
of
you were
Castile
just not supposed to
was
take my
faced with a horrible
sports.
dilemma. Still mourning the loss of her younger brother Alfonso, she was now being asked to continue the civil war against her older half-brother,
Well,
King Enrique.
But Isabella was aware that the two men asking her to keep fighting,
okay.
Juan Pacheco and Archbishop Alfonso Correa da Cunha, would only use her as a puppet to further their own careers. In all likelihood, even if she won the war, she would be powerless.
But it's cool.
Faced
Oh yeah,
with
that's
one
the
of
one
the
I
first
knew.
major decisions of her life, Isabella spent the next weeks in prayer. She knew whatever she decided could not only dictate the rest of her life, but the lives of Castilians for years to come.
In August, she made her decision
I'm telling you, this guy.
and pledged her loyalty to Enrique as the one true king of Castile. She promised that while Enrique was still alive, she wouldn't make a bid for power. However, she demanded to be recognized as the true heir of Castile, stepping over Enrique's daughter, Princess Juana's claim. Enrique agreed to it.
The rebels who supported Alfonso were disheartened by Isabella's decision, but they laid down their weapons. After 3 years of bloodshed, the civil war finally came to an end.
Isabella played it smart. She not only forced Enrique to name her heir, but she coerced him into giving her land in Castile. And most importantly, she demanded that Enrique allow her to
These
choose
guys
who
are
she would marry,
fucking
though she agreed to seek
corrupt.
his permission
And they will
before the
fucking
nuptials.
But the reconciliation was, as
They
always,
fucking
short-lived.
loses up.
About a year after the deal,
Oh my
Enrique
god,
started
and the other
having
guy
second
was
thoughts.
the difference.
Much of this came from the whispers of Juan Pacheco, one of the Civil War's leading architects.
Enrique had forgiven Pacheco for his treasonous acts, and Pacheco, perhaps bitter that Isabella didn't declare herself queen as he advised her to, began plotting to turn Enrique against her.
Every fucking thing.
Land that had been promised to Isabella ultimately wasn't awarded. Princess Juana was again being discussed as potential heir, and offers were being made to marry off Isabella without her approval.
But Isabella refused to let Enrique dictate her life.
Really?
She was tired of being passed around for his benefit. She had maneuvered herself into the line of
This is
succession
the last
and
one.
would do
Herschel
anything to
Walker.
keep it that way.
If that meant arranging a marriage of her own, so be it.
Her calculating eyes turned east to the neighboring kingdom of Araby.
You will have gotten every
Isabella
single
knew
one
that
wrong.
if both kingdoms were united through marriage,
Come
her
on,
marriage,
chuck it
it
up.
would strengthen her eventual bid for power.
So, in
Fuck it.
1469, Isabella began to secretly negotiate her betrothal to Ferdinand II of Aragon.
Choosing 17-year-old Ferdinand seemed like a no-brainer. As a teenager, Ferdinand achieved success in battle during his father's many wars along the border of France, and he also stood to inherit Sicily and the lucrative Catalonia region, one of the major Mediterranean trading hubs.
Meanwhile, for the Kingdom of Aragon, the Union presented the opportunity to finally stake its claim on Castile. For years, Ferdinand's father, yet another King Juan, had set his sights on the neighboring kingdom. A marriage between his son and Isabella would bring him one step closer to snatching Castile for himself.
But Isabella wasn't going to allow that. During the clandestine negotiations, Ferdinand agreed that once she was Queen of Castile, Isabella would rule with total authority, and he would be her consort or powerless spouse. And she agreed that she would act as Ferdinand's consort once he became King of
I'm gonna
Aragon
tell
and
you what, though,
Sicily.
kids.
There
They
however,
weren't calling
one
it that.
minor obstacle.
But I'll never forget. I have a
Isabella and
text message from my
Ferdinand
friend.
were second cousins.
2020.
Because of this, their
This
marriage was
motherfucking thing was
considered
like one
incestuous
person,
unless they
and I
received
said
a
to him
dispensation from
the
the
whole
Pope.
time he told me this one
The
person was
current
going to win,
Pope, Paul
and I said
II,
this motherfucking
was
thing.
in line with Enrique.
As a
And we were
workaround,
both
Ferdinand's father allegedly bribed a
But-
bishop into reading a fake dispensation.
Isabella, a woman who was entirely devoted to the Catholic Church, had just violated Catholic law.
I remember texting him, telling
Not
him
that she seemed overly concerned,
one thing, and then we awoke.
because
and
on
it was
October 19th, Isabella of Castile and Ferdinand of Aragon were married.
Prior to their marriage, Isabella and Ferdinand had only exchanged letters.
really, yeah.
The days leading up to October 19th were the first time they had seen each other in the flesh. And it turned out they got along perfectly. They enjoyed each other's company. They became known around the court for their witty banter. In the evenings, both enjoyed listening to music and dancing.
Most importantly to Isabella, the union helped solidify her legacy of power. Once she became pregnant, her child would inherit and unite the kingdoms of Castile, Aragon, and Sicily.
Shut up. Here.
Unfortunately, their marital bliss
Oh my
evaporated
God.
almost immediately. For starters, Enrique wasn't too pleased with Isabella's cloak and dagger
Oh, it's
wedding.
just that tall
And when
guy?
the couple asked for Enrique's forgiveness, he responded by cutting off Isabella's sources of
Hold
income.
on, this guy would be really big.
Within months,
Oh, yeah.
Isabella's favorite
Well, I
Castile
thought John.
powerful families suddenly
This guy
ended
would
their
be really
support
big.
for her, fearing that the
Is he super
association
tall?
would make them enemies of Enrique. Soon, only a few members of the church
Good for this
agreed
guy.
to financially support the young
Really?
couple.
Yeah, because why?
They
He's
had been
favorite.
reduced to charity cases.
Adding to Isabella's turmoil was Ferdinand's rampant infidelity. Prior to the marriage, Ferdinand had already fathered 2 illegitimate children, and after the wedding, the hormonal teenage boy refused to settle down.
Even after Isabella gave birth to their daughter, Princess Isabel, in October 1470, Ferdinand didn't give up his philandering ways. When he went off to fight in his father's wars, which was constantly, he was accompanied by numerous mistresses.
And as if raising a daughter alone and in near destitution wasn't stressful enough, the issue of the fake papal dispensation reared its ugly head again. Just before the birth of Princess Isabel, word of the forgery became public. Now the marriage was illegal, and the princess was considered illegitimate.
Who won the governor of
For a year,
I know.
Isabella appealed to the Vatican, but Pope Paul II refused to help her. He was aligned with Enrique and was willing to do whatever he could to hurt Isabella's chances as future leader.
However, in the summer of 1471, Pope Paul II died, reportedly of a heart attack. Isabella knew that this was a chance for a clean slate with whoever replaced him. All she needed was someone to vouch for her to the new pope.
Enter Cardinal Rodrigo Borgia.
Like, if you like hit, dude,
By the
think of
start
what a
of the
witch looks like.
1470s, 40-year-old Rodrigo Borgia had become a political mastermind within the Vatican.
Anybody else?
And after being elevated to cardinal at the age of
Rilla
25,
looks like a
Borgia
witch.
spent the next 15 years angling his way closer to the position of Pope.
Moria recognized that he was going to need friends in high places when time came for his own bid. Originally from Aragon, he knew it was wise to create an alliance with Aragon's future king, Ferdinand, and his wife, Isabella.
The first thing Moria did was convince the newly elected Pope to grant Isabella her dispensation. In December 1471, Isabella and Ferdinand's marriage was officially legal. More importantly, their daughter was now considered legitimate, which strengthened Isabella's line of succession.
The next year, Moria traveled to Castile and spent 3 weeks with Isabella. The details of this meeting are unknown, but by the time he left, he was entirely committed to her as Castile's future leader.
Moria traveled around Castile and convinced many noblemen to support Isabella as heir to the throne. The pendulum of public favor swung back in her direction.
But instead of spilling more blood, Isabella wanted to reach an agreement with Enrique diplomatically. He finally agreed to meet with her during Christmas of 1473.
The reunion went exceedingly well. For nearly a week, the two behaved like an actual family. One would never have guessed that they had been violently feuding for years. Within a week, all of Castile learned that the royal family was finally at peace with itself.
After all this time, Isabella finally believed that she and Enrique had put their petty difference aside. He would name her queen, and the matter of succession would finally be put to rest.
Of course, before long, that belief evaporated. Throughout 1474, Enrique's health suddenly and mysteriously began to fail.
Finally, on December 11, 1474, Enrique IV of Castile died. The cause of death is entirely unknown, though some speculated he was poisoned.
But the cause of death was less important than the matter of succession. Even at the time, there was debate as to what actually happened on Enrique's deathbed. Some witnesses claimed that he announced Princess Juana as his heir. Others said he refused to name anyone. The lack of a final will made it even harder to determine who should lead.
The confusion provided a perfect opportunity for Isabella to make a power grab. If she didn't, Castile could slip through her fingers.
So, on December 13, 1474, in Segovia's Central Plaza, 23-year-old Isabella declared herself Queen of Castile. But if she was going to keep what was rightfully hers, she was going to have to stain the Castilian countryside with blood.
Coming up, Isabella fights to keep her crown and accomplishes something no Spanish king ever has.
Like it's making their fucking happen.
On December 13, 1474, in front of a large crowd in the city of Segovia, 23-year-old Isabella declared herself Queen of Castile. Swearing an oath on the Bible, she pledged her loyalty to the church and to the people of Castile. And some of the kingdom's most important officials swore their allegiance to their new queen.
Notably absent among the crowd, however, was her husband, Ferdinand.
Ferdinand was back in Aragon fighting one of his father's wars against the French when Isabella crowned herself.
What's his name?
And according to writer Kirsten Downey, Isabella wasn't in a rush to inform her husband that she was queen, and he was king consort.
Palermo?
Even though he had agreed to act as consort prior to their marriage, Ferdinand seems to have believed that he could outmaneuver Isabella. It's possible that Isabella was fully aware of this and told the messenger to take his time delivering the message.
A week after the coronation, a messenger from the Archbishop finally informed Ferdinand that his wife was queen. By that point, Isabella had already secured loyalty around the kingdom.
Ferdinand finally saw Isabella a week later, and a fight ensued. Ferdinand felt humiliated by the slight and believed that only men could inherit power. If she was queen, he threatened to leave Castile forever.
This threat left Isabella feeling conflicted. On one hand, she actually did love him, even though he was constantly unfaithful to her. And now that she was queen, their 4-year-old daughter needed her father more than ever.
Isabella also knew that as the first woman to lead Castile in 200 years, she would need Ferdinand's help. Since other kingdoms might perceive her as weak, having a man by her side would strengthen her image. So, she proposed a deal.
To placate Ferdinand's vanity, Isabella agreed to put his name first on all administrative documents. This would make it appear as if he were in charge. However, actual power in Castile was hers and hers alone, just as power in Aragon would be his once he became king.
Isabella had an ace up her sleeve during negotiations. She pointed out that by insisting only men could rule, Ferdinand was creating a precedent that could threaten their daughter's claim to the throne. Apparently, that was enough to force Ferdinand to agree.
The timing of the deal couldn't have been better, because within 3 months of taking the crown, Isabella needed Ferdinand's Aragonese forces to defend it. Princess Juana, the possibly illegitimate daughter of the deceased King Enrique, had suddenly declared herself queen, and she had the Portuguese army supporting her.
In the middle of 1475, Castile was again plunged into war. Juana married her uncle, Afonso V, King of Portugal. Soon they invaded Castile and declared themselves king and queen.
But Isabella wasn't going to give up her power so easily. While Ferdinand went out and fought the battles, she led the war strategy. She demanded that they
What
were
would you
to
do?
make war
Oh
by
my God,
fire
I'd make
and blood
Italian.
against the King of Portugal.
I'd make spaghetti
One of her
from this
earliest
Russian hostel with
decisions
this
was to
Italian
raid
immigrant.
Portuguese border
and
town. But
he'd just
despite
be
these
like-
raids,
he'd
most of
be
the
like,
fighting took place in Castile.
This is a bastardization of my country.
At the outset, the war
Yeah,
was
no,
heavily
man,
tilted
oh my
in
God.
Princess Juana's
Really?
favor.
Yeah.
Several
This is
Castilian
the bastardization of
nobles
food.
pledged support for her instead of
That's
Isabella.
what we got.
Plus,
Eating on
Isabella
fucking-
and Ferdinand lacked the forces to protect the towns
stamps.
that did support
What
them.
the hell was his name? Pablo? Paulo? Was it
But a
Paulo?
major turning point came in 1476 at the Battle of Toro, roughly 60 miles from the border with Portugal. Though the battle itself resulted in a draw, psychologically, the Portuguese were defeated. Many soldiers, including King Afonso,
Pacino's in this like 15 times though.
In the 3 years that followed, only small random battles occurred.
Oh, really?
It was
Yeah.
obvious that support for Juana had
What the fuck was his
evaporated,
name?
and in September of 1479, a peace treaty was signed, ending the war and Juana's claim.
Really?
Isabella was officially the undisputed queen of Castile.
It was the most. It was like
now
Giuseppe.
free to do as
She
she
was like
pleased.
Giuseppe
Isabella decided
Italian.
she was
She
going
was the
to
most
do
Italian
something
fucking kid
many
ever.
Spanish kings before her had tried, but none had been able to accomplish.
I don't know.
She
But I
was
just
going
remember
to
you'd be
go
like,
to war with the Muslims.
What did
and
you
reclaim
do?
the region
What did
of
you
Granada
do to
from
my
Christ.
to the sauce? Oh God! Oh
In
God!
711 CE, 7,000 Moors, or Muslims hailing from North Africa,
Are you done?
invaded the Iberian
What was his name?
Peninsula.
I
The
don't know. We
Moors
lived there
firmly
for a
held
while.
power until
Really?
about the 1200s,
Yeah, and
when
then I moved
Spanish
next
kings
in the
slowly
room next door.
reclaimed their
Russian
territory
fucking
and
mom.
forced the
Really?
Muslims
Yeah,
back to
shout
North
there. What's
Africa.
her name?
The one strip of land
she's in
still
my
under Muslim
smartphone.
control by the 1480s was
What was it? Oh,
Granada,
maybe it started with an
ruled
F.
by the Nasrid dynasty,
Really?
and it became a royal tradition for Christian kings to try and reclaim it.
But reclaiming Granada was also personal for Isabella. In 1453, when she was a
Francesco?
toddler, the Muslim Ottoman
I know
Sultan
Francesco.
Mehmed II sacked Constantinople
It
and
was
brought down
Francisco.
the
No, I
Christian
know it's
Byzantine
Francisco.
Empire.
It's a different thing.
The fall of the city sent shockwaves throughout Western Europe. It was the last significant barrier between the Muslims in the East and the
I need to
Christians
fucking
in the West.
shave.
For the next 30
So let's
years,
do it.
Isabella watched as the Ottomans easily
What
made
was
their
her
way
name?
toward Rome. By the time she became queen, she feared that the Nasrid dynasty would
I
ally
like to
itself
shave.
with the Ottomans. If they did, Granada could be the entry point
What the
for an
hell was her
Ottoman
name?
invasion of Europe.
Her name? This
Taking
boy.
back Granada wasn't just a holy war, but a preemptive one.
I lived there
Tensions
with a bunch
between
of
Castile
people.
and Granada had started to boil over in 1480, with occasional attacks from either side along the border. When a band of Moors attacked the Castilian town of Zahara
Shout out to
in
this one guy. Like, he from
1481, some
he's from Chicago.
Castilians decided
He went to
it was
Harvard,
the last
and I was like,
straw.
just
Before
randomly at a bar
Isabella
with him.
even had a chance to respond, a
We
Castilian
get to talking,
nobleman
and he was
decided
just
to
this
capture
random
the Muslim
motherfucker I met from
stronghold
Harvard.
of Alama
And I didn't
in his
really know if
queen's
he was
name.
from Harvard, but I think he
Their
was.
victory was
Right?
enough
Yeah.
to convince Isabella
I'm like,
that
what
it
in
was
the fuck are
time
you
for
doing here?
war.
You'd gone there like
The war to reclaim Granada
30
would be
years ago.
long and brutal.
I said, what in the
Isabella
fuck are
was
you
fully
doing?
aware that in order to succeed, she was going
Really?
to have
Yeah.
to be smarter
He
than her male
was getting younger chicks,
predecessors.
though.
After several early
Yeah, so what is
defeats,
that fucking
mostly due to
motherfucker's name?
Ferdinand's
I don't know.
compulsive
I
desire
remember.
to attack towns using only a few soldiers, Isabella and Ferdinand began
Dude,
to
you
finally
got
work
every
as
one
a
of these
team.
fucking predictions wrong.
Much as they had done in the war with Portugal, Isabella formulated the strategy and raised money, while Ferdinand commanded the troops in
Are
person.
you sure it wasn't Giuseppe?
But strategy only went so far. At
Giovanni?
times,
No,
war
Giuseppe,
requires
no.
strokes of luck, and Queen Isabella knew
Giacomo?
just how to capitalize on a little luck.
When the Nazareth Sultan died, it created a problem all too familiar to the Castilians.
What was his name?
There was a struggle between the Sultan's brother, El Zagal, and his son, Boabdil, for control of Granada. Eventually, the two reconciled and joined forces by May 1486.
Just a few weeks after the reconciliation, Ferdinand captured the town of Loja, and Boabdil was taken
I
prisoner.
don't fucking remember.
Isabella decided to
Cool, Mom.
negotiate with
Are you
Boabdil.
done?
She promised that if he were to overthrow his uncle, she would back him as the sole king. Boabdil knew
What
it
was
was
his name?
foolish to say no.
In April 1487, Boabdil took control of the city of Granada and declared himself king.
You lived in the valley? You lived in a very nice Russian
their
hospital with
previous
Patrice
agreement,
O'Neill?
and even promised to eventually hand over Granada in exchange for places in the eastern
I want
part
to
of the
choose this
kingdom.
fuck so badly.
Boabdil's uncle El
What is that
Zagal
motherfucker's
still
name?
held a couple of
His name was-
citadels, and he refused to lay down his sword. But one by one, his towns surrendered to the Castilians. By 1490, the
I
Nasrid
don't know.
dynasty
But
was
he went to
finished.
New York Film
All
Academy
that
to
was
take me to
left
school
was
there.
the capital
Really?
city
Yeah, but I
itself.
can't remember his name.
But even though Boabdil had promised to hand it over to
Oh.
Isabella, he never
Was it
actually
Paulo?
did.
No, I knew
Isabella grew tired of waiting, and in April 1491, she ordered a siege of Granada. For 7 months, the Spaniards slowly starved the people within the city walls. By fall, they were ready to negotiate a surrender.
The terms were simple. Granada would belong to Castile. Their Christian slaves were to be released.
Why do you do that to
And in
the sun?
exchange, Muslims were to be allowed to continue living peacefully in Granada. And if any Muslims wanted to immigrate to North Africa, Castile would foot the bill.
We used to drink coffee all the time. Really? Yeah, make coffee.
On
We used to
January
make coffee.
2nd,
Oh, this guy can roll his own
Boabdil
cigarettes really well.
handed Granada
Really?
over to the
Yeah.
40-year-old
Why?
Queen
Because it's so
Isabella I.
expensive
For
to
the
smoke.
first
I remember
time in
to buy a
almost
pack of
800
cigarettes
years,
in California, it was like $5 when I moved here,
Muslims
and then
took control of the Iberian Peninsula.
it was like $5 a
Queen
pack for a
Isabella
month.
had done the
And then they had this
unthinkable,
tax that
and
kicked
it
in
was her
in
strategic planning
2000.
and Ferdinand's army that allowed her to
17,
accomplish
and it
what
went
so
up to
many
$10
had
a pack.
failed to do.
And it was like
But Isabella had
immediately
no
everywhere.
intention of actually letting Muslims live
Cigarettes.
peacefully in her
Yeah.
newly
So he had
conquered
these little
land.
filters.
They
Really?
would be subject to
Yep.
the not-so-secret
roll them for
program that had been terrorizing non-Christians for years.
You have a
The
pimple on your
Spanish
ass. You know this?
Inquisition.
Yeah. Is it a pimple or no? It's a bite. It feels like a pimple. Too. Maybe the chapping.
Thanks for listening to Dictators.
You're welcome.
Next week, we'll explore Isabella's role in the Age of Discovery and in orchestrating one of the worst instances of religious persecution in
Man.
history.
You can find all episodes of Dictators and all other podcast originals for free on Spotify.
Not only does Spotify already have all of your favorites,
Shout out to that
but
bitch
now
from
Spotify
Joan of
is making
Arcadia.
it easy for
That
you
show
to
was
enjoy
crap.
all of your favorite podcast originals, like Dictators, for
What was
free
her name?
from your
Mary
phone,
Beth Denberg or
desktop,
some
or smart
shit?
speaker.
2
To
seasons.
stream Dictators on Spotify, just
Who's
open
this
the
bitch?
app and type
Amber
Dictators
Tamblyn. She
in the
becomes
search
big.
bar.
And don't forget to
But,
follow us
yeah.
on Facebook and
Why?
Instagram at Parcast and Twitter at
Don't
Parcast
tell me
Network.
she's married to that guy.
We'll see you next time.
It is. Dude. he
Dictators
really
was created by Max Cutler
Really?
and is a Parcast Studios
Yeah.
original. It is executive produced by Max Cutler, sound designed by Juan Borda, with production assistance by Ron Shapiro, Carly Madden, and Travis Clark. This episode of Dictators was written by Joe Guerra, with writing assistance by Kate Gallagher, and stars Kate Leonard and Richard Rossner.
You can tell it's fun.
Hi, listeners. Before we go, I hope you remember to check out the new Parcast original series, Medical Murders. Every Wednesday, meet the worst the medical community has to offer. Men and women who took an oath to save lives, but instead used their expertise to develop more sinister specialties. Follow
Anyway.
Medical Murders free on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts.
Oh my god, my fucking butthole itches.
August 1486, Toledo, Castile. Two men stood before a tribunal in a dimly lit room. Both were shackled and had nooses around their necks.
Okay, so
Unfitting adornments
she
for
was
two
on
priests of
General
the Catholic
Hospital,
Church.
Agri.
But the tribunal
Joan of
also
Arcadia.
consisted
Joan
of men
Girardi.
from the church. They were
She won a
chosen to
Prime
root
Time
out
Emmy.
heresy throughout
Oh,
Castile.
Sister of the Traveling
And
Pants
they
would be
weren't
big.
selected by the Pope.
By Anne
by Queen Isabella.
Gracier.
The accused standing before
This
the
is a big
tribunal
fucking book.
were charged with Judaizing.
Yeah.
Despite having converted to Catholicism, they were rumored to still secretly be practicing
How
Judaism.
about sister?
And in the eyes of the
Yeah,
tribunal,
sisterhood's a
that
thing.
was a serious offense to the church.
The trial was anything but fair, and within minutes they were declared
Divine
guilty.
secrets of the yeah.
Their punishment? Death.
The condemned were stripped of their priestly robes and ridiculed by their fellow clerics.
Sandra
Then
Bullock,
they were
Ellen
forced to wear a
Burstyn,
San Benito, or robe
Ashley
of
Judd,
atonement, and
Maggie
a carassa, a dunce cap.
Noah
The
Flanagan,
condemned priests were
James
then
Garner,
led outside the building into a
Sherry
courtyard
Jones,
and fastened to a wooden stake. Minutes later, both were engulfed in flames.
Two more victims of the Spanish Inquisition. A
You gonna sing the song?
300-year institution
You wanna sing
created at the behest
the song?
of Queen
Everybody
Isabella
is gonna listen to
of
Coast
Castile.
to Coast right now. Everybody is gonna listen to it for another 2 hours, 3 hours. Everybody's gonna listen to Coast to Coast. Everybody's gonna listen
Welcome
to
to
Coast to Coast.
Dictators, a
Everybody's gonna
podcast
listen to Coast to Coast for another
I'm
3
Richard.
hours.
And I'm Kate. You can find all
Everybody
episodes of
is gonna
Dictators and
listen
all
to
other
Coast to
podcast originals
Coast.
for free on
Everybody
Spotify
is gonna
or
listen
wherever
to
you
Coast
listen
to
to
Coast.
podcasts. To
Everybody
stream
is
Dictators
gonna
for free on
listen to Coast
Spotify,
to
just
Coast.
open the app,
Everybody
type
is
Dictators
gonna
in the
listen
search bar.
to Coast.
Today we
Everybody
conclude our
is gonna
look into the reign
listen
of
to
Queen
Coast to
Isabella
Coast,
I.
and then everybody
From
is gonna
1474
listen to Coast to Coast, and then
She ruled over the
everyone
kingdom
is
of
gonna
Castile with her
listen to
husband
Coast to
Ferdinand
Coast.
II of Aragon as
Everybody's
consort.
gonna listen to Coast
Last
to
week,
Coast.
we
Hey,
explored Isabella's
everybody's gonna
unlikely rise to
listen
the
to
throne,
Coast to Coast.
and how,
Hey,
upon taking power, she did what no man was
White
able to
Oleander,
accomplish:
Mermaid,
reclaim Granada
the
from the Moorish
Sisterhood,
Muslims.
This
Steel
week,
Magnolia,
we'll examine her role as the primary architect of the Spanish Inquisition,
First
one of
Watch
history's
Club,
worst examples of religious persecution,
Sisterhood,
while simultaneously shifting
A
the
Bad
age of
Moms
discovery into
thing.
overdrive by financing
she's
Christopher
lying.
Columbus's voyages to the west.
Bad Moms too.
Coming up, we'll continue our
Who the
dive
fuck's in
into
this?
Isabella's
Catherine
reign.
Hahn, Mila Kunis, shout out to her. Kristen Bell, how about the other bitch? Kevin, not sure.
On January 2nd, 1492,
Christine Baranski,
40-year-old Queen Isabella of
course,
Castile
oh.
made history.
Yeah.
For nearly 800
Christine
years,
Baranski?
the Muslim Moors had controlled parts of the Iberian Peninsula.
So hot.
Now, she was accepting the surrender of
And
their final
in
stronghold,
fucking
Granada.
Right, freeze
For
her
the
ass off in the
dogmatically
bathtub.
Catholic
I
Isabella,
can't wait to be inside her,
conquering
and I want her to tell
Muslims
me.
wasn't just a victory
I just
for
want to say,
Castile or the
I can't
Iberian
wait for her to be
Peninsula as a
inside me.
whole.
No, I can't wait to be inside her. Sorry, lady.
She
And
firmly
just to
believed
ask her,
that she was on a
like
mission
somebody
to spread
Buffalo
Christianity, and part of that mission was to protect it from heretics and infidels at all
Julia.
costs.
Right?
The
Yeah.
Muslims whom she allowed to remain
She's hot
in
as
Granada
fuck.
as her subjects
Daughter's
were
great.
about to experience what all
Right,
costs meant. And as Isabella fought her war against the Muslims out in the open, she had been fighting another holy war in the shadow.
The Inquisition wasn't a Spanish invention. The Romans established the practice as a means to force confessions. For centuries, popes or kings used them to investigate heresy among the Christian faithful, and no group faced more scrutiny for these perceived slights than the Jews.
Jews had inhabited the Iberian Peninsula since the Roman Empire. Many thrived throughout the region, establishing themselves as prominent businessmen, doctors, and philosophers. And they lived in
Okay. Are you
relative
gonna be out
peace.
for see Moransky?
But when the Roman Empire
I
fell,
think she's so hot.
anti-Semitism
She's a good witch.
rose. Many Christians hated just how prosperous the Jews had become. Consequently, Christian kings forced Jews to convert to Christianity or be banished from the peninsula.
When the Muslims conquered the region in the 700s, many Jews helped them defeat the Christians, believing that life might improve.
The
If
Christians,
Karen
however,
Bass was,
never
I would have
forgot
lost
what they
every
perceived
fucking
as the
prediction.
ultimate
And
betrayal.
In the century leading up to
then
Isabella's
I'm gonna
birth,
be fucking
a new
Why?
wave of
'Cause
Christian anti-Semitism took hold of the peninsula. And in 1391 and 1411, these pogroms resulted in forced conversion.
This gave rise to the converso, a label used for converted Jews. And as time passed,
Nietzsche.
conversos climbed the social ladder. Some even became the confessors to the monarchy.
But some conversos continued to practice aspects of their Jewish faith and heritage, such as recognizing the Jewish Sabbath or adhering to Jewish dietary restrictions. Christians began to suspect that conversos weren't genuine converts. Even worse, they believed these crypto-Jews were using Christianity to advance their own
I
careers.
can't believe that fucking bitch is
Something
going.
needed to be
LA
done
mayor.
to preserve Christianity from traitors.
This girl's gonna win. Really, yeah.
The seeds for the Inquisition were planted by Alonso de Ojeda, a Dominican in Seville. When the Queen visited Seville in 1477, halfway through her war with Portugal, Ojeda pleaded with her to do something about the conversos.
Ojeda whispered in the Queen's ear for nearly a year, attempting to convince her that these secret Jews posed a significant threat to the purity of Christianity. They needed rooting out before poisoning the clergy.
After a brief internal investigation, Isabella agreed to seek a papal bull from Pope Sixtus IV. He signed the bull in 1478, which granted Isabella and Ferdinand the right to appoint inquisitors.
2 years later, Tomás de Torquemada, a Dominican friar, was chosen to lead the Inquisition. His
You really think
actions
she's
would
gonna
set a
win?
precedent for nearly
Yeah.
300
I mean,
years
she
of
does
religious
it. Oh, I'm
persecution.
fucked.
The Inquisition's mission was simple: stop the spread of heresy. Technically, this meant any suspected false Christian, but the first targets were conversos, those of Jewish heritage.
Seville was the first city to see the Inquisitors establish their holy office, as the Inquisition came to be known. And within months of its creation, guilty heretics were being burned at the stake.
On February 6, 1481, 6 people were executed in
Do you
Seville.
think she's gonna
The
win?
message was clear: if you were found guilty, death was the likely outcome.
Many conversos fled Seville in 1481. Others came forward and confessed their sins with the hope of receiving a lighter punishment. Some of these so-called lighter punishments included walking around naked or wearing a pointed hat, meant as an embarrassing indicator that a person had faced the holy office.
However, confession was a tricky thing. While some confessed willingly, Others were forced to do so through the use of torture. And before long, torture became synonymous with the Inquisition. The Iron Maiden, the rack, water torture, and the breaking wheel are all said to have been utilized.
What is it?
But contrary to popular belief, torture wasn't ubiquitous. According to historian Henry Kamen, though permitted by the instructions of 1484, in the early years, torture seems to have been considered superfluous and was seldom used. Abundant testimony from edicts of grace and from witnesses was more than sufficient.
Edicts of grace were essentially a proclamation of possible heresies. When an inquisitor came to town, he would read the edict and promise that those who sincerely confessed would receive forgiveness. It was enough motivation for people to come forward on their own and avoid having their limbs stretched.
Even though the mission was to exterminate heresy from Christianity, there appeared to be an extra motivational factor: money.
According to writer Kristen Downey, Pope Sixtus IV gave Isabella permission to collect any goods or money confiscated by the Inquisition, with the money going to the royal treasury.
This meant that the Inquisition was entirely funded by those deemed guilty. Not only was the Holy Office getting rich, so was the monarchy itself.
This put an even bigger target on conversos and older Jewish citizens. Many of them were in the business of money lending, tax collecting, or running some of the more prosperous agricultural businesses that supplied food to the people.
But many conversos worked beyond Spain's business sector. Many found their calling as priests or friars. By the mid-1480s, they were also being investigated as fake Christians, and one particular investigation led to scandal throughout Castile.
The town of Guadalupe is home to one of Spain's holiest shrines, a statue of the Virgin Mary allegedly carved by St. Luke. By the time Isabella became queen, the city was an important pilgrimage site for Catholics, and many of the town's clergy were conversos.
Once the Inquisition was underway, rumors against these converso priests suddenly started to circulate throughout Guadalupe. These rumors claimed that they weren't real Christians and that they gave preferential treatment to Jewish citizens.
In 1485, a special investigation looked into these supposed heretical priests. One of them, Friar Diego de Marchena, allegedly continued to practice Judaism himself, taught other Jews how to pass as Christians, and told people that he had never been baptized.
But Marchena wasn't alone. All 130 friars in the diocese were investigated. Of the 130 friars, 20 were censured, and one was given a life sentence in prison.
Diego de Marchena was tortured and burned at the stake.
According to Downey, the church tried to keep the investigation of Guadalupe a secret. They feared that conversos had infected the monastery. But it's exceedingly difficult to cover up the investigation of 130 priests.
Queen Isabella herself was aware of the Guadalupe incident. According to Downey, she ordered that the money seized from conversos in the town should be used to build a hospital.
The 1480s were merely the beginning. Many details of the program remain unknown, including the number of people who suffered during Isabella's reign.
For centuries, it was believed that hundreds of thousands of people were tried and executed during the Inquisition. Some historians have claimed that by the time it ended in the early 1800s, 1 million people had died.
But recent studies suggest that number is wildly conflated. In 2004, historian Agostino Borromeo authored a 700-page report claiming that the tribunals tried only 125,000 people, and of those, roughly 1% were sentenced to death.
Although the numbers may be lower than initially perceived, it doesn't negate the fact that the blood spilled was a result of Queen Isabella's decision.
It's possible that Isabella saw the Inquisition as wholly justified. Catholicism was her bedrock. It dictated almost every decision she made, and whether she felt any kind of remorse is entirely unknown.
However, we can easily infer that she was not only committed to its existence, but had a desire to see it expand.
In March 1492, just 2 months after reclaiming Granada, both Isabella and Ferdinand suddenly announced that all Jews living in Castile and Aragon were to either convert to Christianity or leave forever, an edict known as the Alhambra Decree.
Though Isabella would claim the idea came to Ferdinand in a dream, she set the plan in
Are
motion.
you done?
The deal she and Ferdinand made once she became queen was that she had the final say on matters in Castile.
Whether it was from the success of the Inquisition or the victory over Granada, it was clear to her that she was the warrior queen of Christendom. It was her mission to not only secure Christianity in Castile and Granada, but to spread it.
So when an Italian explorer returned to Isabella with reports of discovering a new land, she was convinced of her charm.
She was going to spread Catholicism to the new world.
Coming up, Isabella sends the age of discovery into overdrive. Hey, Parcasters, looking for a more lighthearted listen? Then I've got the perfect podcast for you. The new Spotify original from Parcast called Incredible Feats. Hosted by comedian and podcaster Dan Cummins, Incredible Feats is a daily show spotlighting true accounts of mind-blowing physical strength, mental focus, and bizarre behavior. Join Dan every weekday as he goes behind the scenes and into the achievements of everyone from freedivers and body modifiers to ultramarathoners and moms. Incredible Feats is offbeat entertainment that's sometimes weird, sometimes wonderful, and always surprising. Search Incredible Feats and follow free on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts.
Now back to the story.
1492 would prove to be one of the most critical years in Isabella of Castile's life and in world history. With Granada reclaimed and the Jews expelled from the kingdom, it was time for her to expand her reach. During the war with Granada, an Italian explorer had come to Isabella with a voyage proposal so crazy that many around the court did not take him seriously. Many believed that his idea of heading west to find an easier path to the east was absurd.
But Isabella disagreed. So, in the spring of 1492, not long after the Alhambra Decree, she gave Cristobal Colon, aka Christopher Columbus, the financial backing to sail west.
It was an expedition 7 years in the making.
Exploration was in Queen Isabella's blood. Her Portuguese grandmother, the one who raised her as a child, was cousin to the famed explorer Henry the Navigator.
Isabella always had an interest in making Castile a leader in exploration. The problem was that she was too busy at war with her Portuguese cousins and then with the Muslims to find the time. But just because she had wars to win didn't mean she wasn't thinking about the future. And when Columbus came to court, she knew she had found her man. But at the time, she wasn't ready to commit.
The first time Columbus pitched his idea of finding a quicker route to India and China was in mid-1486. According to Downey, Columbus proclaimed that his expedition would make trade quicker and thus replenish her dwindling treasury thanks to the war in Granada. More importantly, he capitalized on her well-known faith.
Columbus claimed that the potential riches he could bring in from trade would be be enough to fund a crusade to reclaim Jerusalem, which for the past 200 years had been under Muslim control.
Isabella was naturally interested, but she knew that she couldn't afford to fund such an expedition in the middle of the war. However, Isabella was fully aware that Columbus had pitched the same idea to the Portuguese before he came to her. She didn't want Columbus to go back to them. So she decided to not only finance his trip, but paid him to stay in Castile until she had the funds together. Columbus was forced to wait nearly 7 years. In that time, he feared that Isabella was never going to actually keep her word.
But then Granada fell in January of 1492. The war was over, and Isabella was free to finally invest in her desire to explore the world.
After a few more months of waiting, Isabella gave him the green light. She gave Columbus roughly 2 million maravedis, or about $1 million today, 90 men, and 3 ships to sail west.
Writer Kristen Downey notes that Isabella wanted to make it clear that from the very moment she okayed the venture, that it was a Castilian expedition.
Driving the point home was that of the 90 men on board, 85 were Castilian, 4 were Italian, and only 1 was Portuguese. Not a single sailor hailed from Aragon, her husband's home country. On August 3rd, 1492, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria set sail from Palos into the unknown. Within a month, many among the crew believed that Columbus was a charlatan, leading them all to their deaths.
But then, on October 12th, a sailor aboard the Pinta said the words they so desperately wanted to hear. Land.
The 3 ships anchored somewhere in the Bahamas. Once on land, the crew was entirely enchanted by 2 things: the beautifully lush setting and the indigenous people who inhabited it.
Right away, Columbus saw the Taino, the first indigenous people he encountered, as potential slaves, noting in his journal that they ought to make good servants. And in a letter to Isabella, he promised to bring her slaves without number.
It was a proposition he would come to regret.
For 2.5 months, Columbus Island hopped and declared land in the name of Ferdinand and Isabella, including people. At the same time, he took note of the gold and jewels around the necks of the indigenous people. He became convinced that this untouched land was full of riches to be mined.
Finally, on January 2nd, 1493, Columbus sailed back to Castile, leaving a group of men behind to colonize and search for gold.
Columbus returned to Castile in March 1493 to a hero's welcome. The Spanish monarchs and the rest of Europe believed that Columbus had discovered a new world, though recent evidence has shown that the Norse sailed to present-day Newfoundland 500 years earlier.
The discovery reaffirmed Isabella's belief in her destiny to spread Catholicism. In fact, in the weeks following Columbus's return, she commissioned more voyages to the New World. One of the critical elements was converting the indigenous people to Catholicism.
Surprisingly, forced conversion wasn't on the table. For his second voyage, which set sail in September 1493, Isabella instructed Columbus to treat the said Indians very well and lovingly, and abstain from doing them any injury. And that anyone who did treat them poorly, Columbus was to punish them severely.
It is unclear exactly why she viewed the indigenous people differently than Muslims or Jews. Perhaps she didn't see them as a threat to Christendom. Maybe she wanted to convert them before Jewish or Muslim explorers made it to the New World.
But for the time being, Isabella knew she had a problem. As news of Columbus's voyage spread, the threat of other kingdoms staking their claims became a cause for concern. Isabella knew she needed to bolster as much support for land rights as possible. And one man could help her.
Rodrigo Borgia, now known throughout Europe as Pope Alexander VI.
Borgia had been vital in helping Isabella stake her claim to the throne, forging alliances with Castilian nobles. Plus, he was Spanish, so he would always have some bias towards Castile and Aragon.
However, Borgia was ridiculously corrupt. It was well known that he had broken his vow of chastity and fathered at least 5 children with his mistress. Even more offensive, rumors quickly spread that he had bribed his way to the head of the church. Such stories made the pious Isabella cringe at the harm Borgia was doing to the sanctity of the church.
But she knew that she needed his help with her claim to this new world. So, for the time being, she was willing to put her morals aside.
Early in 1493, Isabella asked Borgia to declare ownership of the discovered lands. In May, Borgia issued 4 papal bulls that gave Isabella precisely what she wanted. Better yet, the bulls entrusted Isabella with conquering the new territories in the name of Catholicism.
To keep the kingdoms of Castile and Aragon as a close ally, Borgia had given Isabella half of the world.
Of course, not everyone was happy with the papal bulls. The Portuguese felt they had just as much claim to undiscovered lands as the Spanish. Who was the Pope to decide that half the unknown globe belonged to Isabella?
Isabella knew another war with Portugal wasn't in anyone's best interest. It could financially derail her plans for more expeditions. So, she decided to take a diplomatic approach.
In June 1494, Isabella and King João of Portugal signed the Treaty of Tordesillas. Under the terms, the globe was divided at 370 leagues west of the Cape Verde Islands. Everything east of the line went to Portugal, namely the coast of Africa and parts of present-day Brazil, and everything west of the line went to Castile.
Isabella made out like a bandit. With this agreement, she staked her claim on practically all of America. It was a defining moment in her reign and the rapidly expanding Spanish Empire.
Since proclaiming herself queen 20 years earlier, Isabella had done more than any other ruler in history. Now she had permission to fulfill her mission and spread Catholicism to the rest of the unknown world. Nothing could stand in her way.
That is, until reports from Columbus's second voyage began to trickle back to Castile. And as news of atrocities against the indigenous people reached Isabella's ears, she knew that it would not only put her immediate future in jeopardy,
but her legacy as well.
Coming up, Isabella looks to secure her legacy and put her children in power.
Now, back to the story.
In June 1494, 43-year-old Queen Isabella of Castile ruled the world. After Columbus announced his discovery of new lands, Isabella quickly made deals that solidified her right to claim as much undiscovered land as possible for herself. Between the Pope's papal bulls and a treaty with Portugal, she seemingly owned half the globe.
20 years into her reign, she was at her political zenith. The Spanish Inquisition continued to purge heretics throughout the kingdom. Tens of thousands of Jews had either left the peninsula or converted, and riches from an entirely unmolested land were soon going to make their way into her coffers.
Isabella was on the cusp of turning a relatively small kingdom into a world superpower. All that remained was to strengthen her family's future through arranged marriages for her children.
But then, Christopher Columbus returned from his second voyage, forcing Isabella to put the matchmaking plans on hold. It wasn't because she couldn't do 2 things at once, but because Columbus had directly disobeyed an order, and he needed to be dealt with.
By the time he returned in 1496, Isabella realized she made a mistake in trusting him to lead her divine mission for the New World.
On this second voyage, Columbus and the Castilians landed near present-day Puerto Rico. Right away, they made contact with the Caribbean people, reportedly a much fiercer tribe of indigenous people than the Taino.
Relations between the two quickly soured when the Castilians discovered what appeared to be cooked human flesh in the Caribbean encampments. Even today, there is still a debate over whether or not the Caribbeans were cannibals. Some scholars posit that the uncooked flesh was for ceremonial purposes rather than consumption.
Regardless, both sides became aggressive and fighting ensued. And because the Castilians possessed far superior weaponry, the Caribbeans didn't stand a chance.
Throughout the next 2 years of the voyage, Columbus wreaked havoc on the various indigenous tribes as they island hopped across the Caribbean.
Witnessing the atrocities was Bartolomé de las Casas, a colonizer turned historian and champion of indigenous people. He was disgusted at how petty slights by the natives, such as theft, resulted in harsh and brutal reactions from the Castilians, like whippings or executions.
At times, Columbus ordered the punishments himself. Other times, he looked the other way when his men named or murdered.
Las Casas described such acts of violence as just the beginning of the flow of blood, which was to flow so copiously from then on all over the island.
As if slaughtering the indigenous people wasn't enough, Columbus thoroughly thumbed his nose at Isabella by sending hundreds of slaves back to Castile.
According to Downey, Isabella was furious when she heard about the slaves. So furious that she ordered them to be returned to the New World at once. Sadly, many died before they made it back home. This was mostly due to diseases that they were unaccustomed to, such as smallpox.
Though the indigenous people did get some revenge, they introduced the Castilians to syphilis, which would spread through Europe like wildfire.
When Columbus finally returned to Castile at the beginning of 1496, 45-year-old Queen Isabella had grown tired of the Italian, to some extent.
Even though she financed 2 more of his voyages in later years, it was evident that she didn't view him as her lead explorer anymore. Instead, throughout the rest of the 1490s and earlier 1500s, she put her trust in other, more respectable adventurers.
With her trust in more capable explorers solidified, she knew that it was time to finally secure her children's future. With each passing year, her empire grew bigger and wealthier. She didn't want her children to go through the chaos she experienced to secure the throne.
The time had come for Queen Isabella to embrace her duty as a matchmaker.
Makes it fucking shoots air.
As a mother, Isabella refused to coddle her 5 children. Instead of parading them around and pampering them, she raised all 5 to be strong leaders. She had to. After Princess Isabel was born in 1470, her 4 other surviving children were all raised during times of war.
They needed to learn the harsh realities of life during such turbulent times. To that end, each grew up understanding their selected mates weren't just to form strategic allies for their mother, but secure their place as future leaders in Castile and beyond.
First up, of course, was Princess Isabel. Princess Isabel was no longer the heir to the throne because of her brother, Prince Juan. However, Queen Isabella knew that Princess Isabel still played a vital role when it came to peace with Portugal.
In November 1490, Princess Isabel married Prince Afonso, heir to the Portuguese throne.
Here.
Unfortunately,
Remember?
even though the match was perfect,
What is
the
it?
marriage didn't last
5.5 to
long.
1.
Less than a year later, Prince Afonso died in a horseback riding accident. Princess Isabel fell into a deep depression. Worse yet, she refused to remarry, which frustrated the queen to no end. But Queen Isabella wasn't going to let her daughter's depression stand in her way.
Really?
Meantime, the
Why?
Queen
Because this
worked
guy
on the
looks
rest
like
of
he
her
just
group,
got up and was sick.
and not long after Columbus came back from his disastrous second voyage, Isabella had put together a package deal with a powerful European family, the Habsburgs.
In 1496, Princess Joanna married Philip, Duke of Burgundy. Less than a year later, Prince Juan, the heir apparent to Castile, married Philip's sister Margaret. On
Look at how
paper,
this truck.
it was a match
How
Queen
this
Isabella
fucking
could
I love
only
it. He
dream
just
of.
rides this bitch.
Should
Watch
both
this motherfucker
marriages
just ride
produce
that shit.
healthy heirs, the impact on
He's
world
not
events
sluts.
could be historic.
As if Queen Isabella couldn't have been any happier, Princess Isabel had finally agreed to remarry. It wasn't easy, but eventually the princess accepted King Manuel of Portugal's marriage proposal.
The summer of 1497 was indeed a high point in Queen Isabella's personal life. 3 of her children were either already married or engaged, and a foreign, Catherine, was soon betrothed to the heir of England. All that was left was Princess Maria, and the Queen of Castile was confident that in no time at all she'd find a perfect strategic match. Her dynastic legacy was nearly complete.
But then, tragedy struck.
In October 1497, on the eve of Princess Isabel's wedding, Prince Juan died of an unknown illness. The heir to Castile was once again Princess Isabel.
But the implications were even more significant. Once Princess Isabel produced an heir with King Manuel of Portugal, that child would inherit 2 growing empires. The stage was set for Queen Isabella's grandchild to rule half the known world.
The thought of this wasn't lost on Queen Isabella. In fact, it became her only source of solace when tragedy struck the family once more. In August 1498, Princess Isabel died giving birth to her son Miguel. In less than a year, the Queen's 2 eldest children had died.
Though Queen Isabella surely mourned their deaths as any mother would, she also knew as Queen that in her grandson was the future of the family. She was going to see fit that he was ready to rule over more land and people than any in history. She was going to raise Miguel as if he were her own son.
But in July 1500, Miguel died in Isabella's arms a month before his second birthday.
Why don't you go over this way instead? Okay.
The death of the infant Miguel meant that Queen Isabella's heir was now her daughter, Princess Joanna. In 1502, Joanna, who was living in present-day Belgium, was recalled to Castile. The Queen needed to educate her daughter on the intricacies of governing an ever-expanding kingdom.
Unfortunately, Isabella, now in her 50s, was physically, mentally, and emotionally drained. According to Downey, Isabella suffered periods of debilitating fatigue, chills and fevers, and had some unspecified internal ailment, possibly cancer.
Because of her rapidly declining health, Isabella was unable to fully grasp that her heir, Joanna, was in an abusive marriage. When it became apparent that Joanna might inherit the kingdom, her husband, Philip, Duke of Burgundy, angled for ways to usurp her. He began to psychologically terrorize his wife, including stripping their children from her care and bribing her servants to be more loyal to him.
Full like a
Early in her reign, Queen Isabella probably wouldn't have tolerated such blatant acts of disrespect,
I float like a
especially from a
butterfly.
future king consort.
I float like
However,
a
because of her declining health, all Isabella was able to do was try and influence Philip to be more attentive
Oh,
to
the
his
show's
wife.
got to because
Philip,
we're doing this. It was after practice. It was right before I was going to Justine. I was like, "Hey, you wanna? Hey, Mara, you wanna do
Isabella was
stroboscopic effect on
practically
LED?"
unable to rule.
I was like, "No,
and
but
retreated
Thomas Samba
from
was
public life.
like, I'll do a
In
stroboscopic
October,
effect on LED."
she became bedridden.
So then Thomas Samba and I did a
As news
stroboscopic effect
trickled
on
through
LED.
Castile that the Queen was near death, Castilian noblemen dreaded what might become of the kingdom.
The truth was, nobody in Castile liked King Ferdinand. For years, he was busy fighting wars in Naples, and because of the psychological abuse that Joanna had endured, Many believed she was unfit to succeed such a strong queen-like mother. For the first time in 30 years, there was genuine fear throughout the land.
And it seems that Isabella was in fear of the future as well. She asked Ferdinand to make her one final promise, not to remarry.
For the last decade, she had done all she could to protect her line of succession. If Ferdinand were to remarry, it could undo everything and leave her remaining children with nothing. Ferdinand agreed.
Just take the cup off it.
On November 26, 1504, 53-year-old Queen Isabella died. Her final act was performing the sign of the cross.
Unlike the succession chaos that followed the death of King Enrique IV, Isabella made it abundantly clear that Joanna was to rule Castile. And if Joanna were unable to rule, the crown would go to Joanna's son, Prince Charles. Ferdinand was allowed to act as Charles's regent.
Neither Ferdinand nor Philip, Duke of Burgundy, were happy with Isabella's final wishes. They went to great lengths to negate her decrees.
Ferdinand broke his promise to Isabella and remarried within a year of her death. He hoped to produce a male heir and usurp the Castilian throne from his daughter.
I'm so fucking
Unfortunately, the only baby he had with his second wife died hours after being born.
Worse yet for him, Ferdinand's reputation in Castile quickly soured for dishonoring Isabella. He was forced to stay in Aragon for the rest of his life.
Meanwhile, Philip returned to Castile in 1506 and did all he could to paint Joanna as mentally unstable. Sadly, to some extent, the propaganda campaign worked. History now remembers her as Joanna the Bad.
But despite his best efforts, Philip died before ever obtaining power in Castile. In September 1506, during a night of heavy drinking, Philip was suddenly struck with a stomach illness. Some believe he quite literally partied to death.
In 1516, Joanna's son Charles became co-monarch of Castile and Aragon. Though Joanna would remain queen for decades, Charles was acting regent. He became the first official king of a unified Spain. In the years that followed, he would also become king of Germany and Italy, and Holy Roman Emperor.
Like the Leviathan.
Charles V's empire became one of the first on which the sun never set.
Most importantly, though, Charles was a devoted Catholic, and during much of his reign, he fought against the Protestant Reformation, for which his grandmother Isabella would have been proud.
When Queen Isabella died in 1504, her death was mourned by many throughout the peninsula and Europe. The Italian courtier Baldassare Castiglione wrote, "Unless the people of Spain have all conspired to lie in praising her, there has not been in our time a more shining example of true goodness, of the greatness of spirit, of prudence, of piety, in short, of every virtue, than Queen Isabella."
Much of Castiglione's statement rings true. From the day she was born, Isabella was never seriously considered for a role in power. Tradition would never have allowed it.
But she refused to let societal norms dictate her life. After years of conflict with her half-brother, she seized power for herself. And she made sure that her scheming husband couldn't take it away from her.
What resulted was a 30-year reign that few European monarchs could dream of. She reconquered Granada, and her financing of a small expedition opened the door to a whole new world.
She turned the relatively small kingdom of Castile into a Spanish empire.
Of course, not everyone would agree with Castiglione. It's hard to imagine that the Iberian Jews, who were forced to leave their ancestral homes, wept over Isabella's death, or the many victims of the Spanish Inquisition.
Kantoshi.
The Inquisition continued for another 300 years, finally ending in 1834.
Did you find it, you little
And
bitch?
although new evidence has recently
I'll
shown
fist fight
that
you
it perhaps
in the middle of
wasn't as
Times
bloody as
Square.
initially believed,
Shirtless
the
like
average
she
death
thought.
toll is around 4,000. It was still an act of religious genocide.
And Isabella was its leading architect.
For better or for worse, no other European ruler, man or woman, has had a more lasting impact on world history than Queen Isabella I of Castile.
Remember, you're gonna win the lottery, and you're gonna people are gonna win elections. What happened? Every single one lost. Every single one.
Thanks for listening to Dictators. Next week, we'll go back across the English Channel and dive into the life and reign of Mary I of England.
You can find all episodes of Dictators and all other podcast originals for free on Spotify. Not only does Spotify already have all of your favorite music, but now Spotify is making it easy for you to enjoy all of your favorite podcast originals like Dictators for free from your phone, desktop, or smart speaker.
To stream Dictators on Spotify, just open the app and type Dictators in the search bar.
And don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Parcast and Twitter at Parcast Network. We'll see you next time.
Dictators was created by Max Cutler and is a Parcast Studios original. It is executive produced by Max Cutler, sound designed by Juan Borda, with production assistance by Ron Shapiro, Carly Madden, and Travis Clark. This episode of Dictators was written by Joe Guerra, with writing assistance by Kate Gallagher, and stars Kate Leonard and Richard Rossner.
Listeners, you don't want to miss Incredible Feats, the all-new Spotify original from Parcast. Host Dan Cummins free falls straight into the weirdest, wildest achievements of all time. New episodes air every weekday. Search Incredible Feats and follow free on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. On June 22nd, 1536, 20-year-old Mary Tudor, daughter of King Henry VIII of England, faced an impossible decision. Before her was a legal document that demanded her signature, and if she didn't sign it, it meant almost certain death.
But the terms of the document were practically impossible for her to reconcile with. She knew that if she signed it, it would be a betrayal of all her principles, especially her Catholic faith. In doing so, she would acknowledge that her father, and not the Pope, was the supreme Christian leader.
Additionally, she would have to accept Henry's marriage to his new bride and be forced to acknowledge that the marriage to her mother was unlawful. She would be admitting her own status as a
Is that
bastard.
her name, Lauren?
Mary's two guiding principles were her mother and her religion.
Where was she?
But she wasn't ready to die. She was beloved throughout all of England and knew that if she acquiesced and bided her time, eventually she could become queen.
So young Mary capitulated. With one stroke of the quill, she renounced her devotion to the Pope and her mother. Mary knew that under the circumstances, she could be forgiven for doing so.
But in signing Lady Mary's submission, as the document became known, Mary came to a significant conclusion.
Never again would she submit to anyone's will. One day she would rule over all of England, and when her time came, any man or woman who had a hand in forcing her to sign the submission would be put to death.
Did she come within 2 years? I don't think I ever met a single girlfriend actually within 2 years. No one I think I've ever met.
Welcome to Dictators, a Parcast original. I'm Richard.
And I'm Kate. On this show, we're going deep into the minds of some of history's most hated despots. In this series, we're delving into the stories of bloody female rulers in the Middle Ages and Renaissance.
You can find all episodes of Dictators and all other Parcast originals for free on Spotify. To stream Dictators for free on Spotify, just open the app and type Dictators in the search bar.
Last week, we finished our look into Queen Isabella I of Castile, and how she took a small kingdom of the Iberian Peninsula and turned it into a Spanish empire. This week, we'll turn to Isabella's granddaughter, Queen Mary I, who reigned as Queen of England from 1553 to 1558.
In this episode, we'll cover Mary's childhood as she survived King Henry VIII's turbulent marriages. And we will explore the Catholic devotion that eventually put them at odds and threatened her life.
Next week, we'll dive into the circumstances that finally led her to seize the crown. We'll also look at how she squandered her respect among the people by sentencing her enemies to death, giving her the nickname Bloody Mary.
We have all that and more coming up. Stay with us.
For most of her life, Mary Tudor lived in the shadow of her father, King Henry VIII, perhaps England's most famous royal monarch. Therefore, it's impossible to understand the trajectory of her life without understanding his. Much of Mary's reign as queen is a consequence of the decisions and actions made by her father.
Although he's most widely known today for his 6 wives, Henry VIII was responsible for some of the most significant accomplishments and failures of any British monarch.
One of the most brilliant men to occupy the throne, Henry was well-versed in literature, language, arts, and science. He was charming, handsome, and charismatic. Literally and figuratively, a Renaissance man.
During his 38-year reign, Henry was responsible for the expansion of the British Navy into a global powerhouse, as well as for the acquisitions of Ireland and Wales. But Henry's most significant accomplishment was spearheading the English Reformation.
For over 1,000 years, Catholicism was the official religion throughout Europe. But in the early 1500s, Martin Luther, a former Catholic priest, had become disillusioned with various elements of Catholicism as dictated by the Pope in Rome.
In particular, Luther loathed the selling of indulgences, a kind of absolution from sinning, and the superficiality of confession. As a result, Luther broke off from the church and created his own religious sect. He even translated the Bible into German. At that point, it had only been available in Latin.
Luther's religious teachings spread like wildfire. But for the longest time, the fire failed to catch in England. Much of this had to do with the fact that King Henry VIII was such a staunch Catholic.
However, Henry's and England's break from the Catholic Church would eventually occur, and it was within this period of upheaval that Mary Tudor, a devout Catholic herself, came of age.
Born on February 18, 1516, Mary was the only child of Henry Tudor and Catherine of Aragon, the daughter of Queen Isabella of Castile. Mary wasn't their only child. However, she was the only child who managed to survive. 4 of Catherine's previous pregnancies resulted in stillbirths or death in early infancy. Therefore, Mary's birth and survival were considered nothing short of a miracle. However, Mary was a girl, and for the sake of succession, Henry needed a male heir.
Nonetheless, Henry and Catherine showered Mary with affection and praise befitting a royal only child. And since both were highly educated, Mary's own studies became their first priority.
A precocious child, Mary studied Latin, French, and Spanish. Mary's Latin was so good that Henry Parker, one of the most respected writers of the era, described her as so ripe in the Latin tongue that your grace could not only perfectly read, write, and construe Latin, but furthermore translate any hard thing of the Latin into our English tongue.
But beyond her skills in language, Mary became an accomplished musician and dancer. Even as a young child, she was known for entertaining dignitaries by playing the virginals, a precursor to the harpsichord. She also displayed the poise and intelligence of a young woman well beyond her years.
Mary's mother, Catherine, did everything in her power to make sure her daughter was raised as a smart, virtuous, independent, and Catholic young woman. She didn't want Mary to simply exist as a future bride to a potential king. Rather, she wanted to instill in her all the qualities and characteristics that would allow her to one day lead on her own.
So from a young age, education and Catholicism were the two most important aspects of Mary's life. And since Henry was still a practicing Catholic, he wholeheartedly encouraged her piety. Yet despite his encouragement and praise, Mary was largely relegated to the background. Instead, like many royal women of the era, he considered Mary as a political pawn.
From an early age, Henry looked to Mary as a means to solidify alliances. At only 2 years old, Mary was promised to the infant French dauphin, or heir apparent to France. In fact, an entire ceremony was performed to mimic a royal wedding.
Few 2-year-olds understand the significance or meaning of a wedding. And in this case, the ceremony was simply a pretense for establishing an alliance between England and France. But Mary wasn't like most 2-year-olds. In fact, during the ceremony, Mary inquired of the officiant, "Are you the Dauphin of France? If you are, I wish to kiss you."
Unfortunately, the arrangement was nullified a few years later due to the constantly wavering relations with France. The entire process was a harbinger of future marriage arrangements, all of which fell apart eventually.
Still, Mary enjoyed the pageantry of these events in which she sang and danced for her future suitors or their adult handlers. After one such gala, an envoy reported, "She promises to become a handsome lady, although it is difficult to form an idea of her beauty, as she is still so small."
The young Mary spent most of her time with her mother. When she wasn't studying with various tutors, the two went hunting, attended mass, and even gambled. Though by all accounts, she lost a lot more than she won.
The relationship with her father, on the other hand, wasn't nearly as close. By 1525, Catherine of Aragon was 40 years old. It was clear that she would never give Henry the male heir he so desired. And when it came to his only child, Mary, he begrudgingly began to see her as the future of England.
As a result, he decided to send 9-year-old Mary to the Welsh marches to preside over the Council of Wales. Though the appointment was more ceremonial than official, it did serve to officially establish Mary's role as heir to the throne.
For the next 3 years, Mary ceremonially presided over the Welsh court. It was here that she learned the basics of politics and government, only occasionally returning to London to visit her mother and father. But in 1528, 12-year-old Mary returned to London for good. However, by the time Mary arrived, the relationship between Henry and Catherine had deteriorated significantly, and the future of England hung in the balance. Though Henry and Catherine were famous for sustaining one of the happiest of all royal marriages, Henry was nonetheless a notorious womanizer. Over the years, he'd taken a number of mistresses and grew to resent Catherine as she became older and less attractive in his eyes. And with the lack of a male heir, that resentment intensified. Of course, that had more to do with him than her.
With time against him, Henry began looking for ways to legally end his marriage and find a new wife who could give him the son he desperately wanted. Ever the philanderer, a young woman caught Henry's eye in the mid-1520s.
But unlike previous mistresses, this lady refused to submit to Henry's sexual demands. That is, unless they were married.
So, Henry's mission was clear. Divorce Catherine of Aragon and marry the beautiful and effervescent Anne Boleyn.
At the time, though, Divorce was illegal within the Catholic Church and required a dispensation from the Pope. In 1527, Henry took his case to Pope Clement VII. Naturally, this was big news around Europe, and it didn't take long to reach the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, a man who just happened to be Catherine's nephew.
Charles V obviously was on his aunt's side and made his own appeal to the Pope. Deny Henry's dispensation or face my army. Unfortunately for Henry, the Pope was happy to oblige the Emperor.
Furious at this perceived betrayal, Henry set in motion a series of events that would not only shape the future of the Christian Church in Britain, but would alienate himself from Mary, his virtuous Catholic daughter.
All for the sake of a divorce, Henry initiated perhaps the most significant religious event in Britain's history, the English Reformation.
The following decade would see Henry name himself as the supreme head of the Christian Church, translate the Bible into English for the first time, and seize and redistribute the Catholic Church's property, including the dissolution of monasteries.
All of which had the desired effect of creating a nasty schism between Henry, the leaders of the Catholic Church, and his own daughter. The ardent Catholic that she was, Mary took the separation personally.
Meanwhile, his bride-in-waiting, Anne Boleyn, sought to amplify the discord between father and daughter. Anne knew that Henry was still fond of Mary. She also knew that if she couldn't produce a male heir, Mary would still be first in line to inherit the kingdom. So Anne got to work, sowing the seeds of distrust. And nothing was off limits. Not even murder.
Coming up, Henry VIII finally gets his divorce, and his new wife wastes no time driving a wedge between her husband and his daughter.
Hey, Parcasters, looking for a more lighthearted listen? Then I've got the perfect podcast for you. The new Spotify original from Parcast called Incredible Feats. Hosted by comedian and podcaster Dan Cummins, Incredible Feats is a daily show spotlighting true accounts of mind-blowing physical strength, mental focus, and bizarre behavior. Join Dan every weekday as he goes behind the scenes and into the achievements of everyone from freedivers and body modifiers to ultra-marathoners and moms. Incredible Feats is offbeat entertainment that's sometimes weird, sometimes wonderful, and always surprising. Search Incredible Feats and follow free on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts.
Now back to the story.
By 1530, it had been 3 years since 14-year-old Mary had returned from her time in the Welsh court. The English Reformation was underway, and her parents' marriage was rapidly on the decline. Back in London, Mary continued her educational and religious pursuits and spent most of her time in the company of her mother, Catherine of Aragon. But unbeknownst to Mary, a vindictive and determined Anne Boleyn was waiting in the wings to bring her down.
39-year-old Henry's affections for the 20-something Anne Boleyn were no secret in the royal court, and as the royal marriage deteriorated, Anne became increasingly bold in her speech and actions, especially concerning Henry's wife and daughter. At one point, she remarked to one of Catherine's ladies-in-waiting that she cared not for the Queen or any of her family, and that she would rather see her hanged than have to confess that she was her queen and mistress.
During this period, Henry was constantly presenting Catherine of Aragon with divorce documents. In accordance with her Catholic faith and steadfast belief that she was the rightful queen, Catherine refused to sign. With each refusal came threats from Henry to punish her, including a permanent separation between her and Mary.
The effect of these threats was devastating on Mary and Catherine. Physically, both began experiencing stomach and digestive issues that were possibly a manifestation of stress. These ailments would continue to plague Mary throughout her life.
As 1530 continued, Henry saw less and less of Mary the closer he got to Anne Boleyn. Not only did Anne drive a wedge between Henry and Mary, but she also managed to divide Mary and her mother.
During that summer, Henry and Anne Boleyn took an extended trip together. In the meantime, Mary and Catherine, who had been banished from the royal court by this time, spent the summer together at one of their estates.
However, when Henry and Anne returned from their vacation, Henry issued an ultimatum. If Catherine still refused to sign the divorce papers, he would order Mary to a nearby outpost to resume her studies. This would essentially make the separation between Mary and Catherine permanent.
Although it broke her heart to do so, Catherine refused to acquiesce to her husband's demands. Henry made good on his threat. Mary never saw her mother again.
In 1532, Henry's quest for religious and royal omnipotence took a giant leap forward. Henry not only awarded Anne Boleyn a royal title and property, but he forced the English clergy to acknowledge him as their lord and commander. This meant that if any decision were to be made concerning the growing Church of England, Henry would have the final say, even when it came to his divorce.
As for their personal lives, 1532 was also a big year for Henry and Anne. Though they still weren't officially married, by December the two finally consummated their relationship. By Christmas time, Anne was pregnant, which meant Henry's divorce situation needed to be expedited. On January 25th, the two were finally, albeit secretly, married.
The ceremony was officiated by Archbishop Thomas Cranmer, one of Henry's most trusted advisors and senior figures among the British clergy. Cranmer had been instrumental in convincing Henry to separate from the Catholic Church and to pursue his marriage to Anne Boleyn. And he soon proved just as instrumental in attempting to revoke all of Mary and Catherine's royal privileges.
On May 23rd, Cranmer made the official announcement that Henry and Anne were married and declared the king's marriage to Catherine of Aragon invalid. To celebrate the occasion, a visibly pregnant Anne Boleyn rode through the city en route to her coronation ceremony.
But as she made her way through the streets of London, Anne was met with shouts and jeers. Not a single spectator shouted, "God save the Queen," as was customary for such an occasion. Proof to Anne that Catherine remained immensely popular with the British public, despite her divorce and demotion.
In fact, Catherine was ordered to surrender her title, her coat of arms was removed from Westminster Hall, and she was unable to leave her remote estate without Henry's permission. Worst of all, Henry banned all forms of contact between Catherine and Mary.
Although it pained 16-year-old Mary tremendously, she never let her father know. In fact, she attempted to trick him into thinking that she remained loyal to him. Instead of disparaging her father or his new bride, Mary praised them both. Her plan seemed to work. Henry commended his daughter's wisdom and prudence. For the time being, it appeared that Mary would remain princess.
For Anne Boleyn public, she was even heard to remark, "I would have the princess for the lady's maid, but that is only to make her eat humble pie, or to marry her to some varlet, which would be an irreparable injury."
Anne also believed that her forthcoming, undoubtedly male child was going to usurp Mary as the king's heir. Unfortunately, when the baby was delivered on September 7th, 1533, Anne gave birth to a girl, Elizabeth.
When news of the child's gender spread across Europe, many felt it was Henry's punishment for betraying Catherine and the Catholic Church. Baby Elizabeth even received a disparaging nickname, the concubine's little bastard. Blinded by rage and a perceived betrayal on the part of Anne's womb, Henry irrationally took his rage out on Mary.
Like her mother before her, Mary was stripped of her royal title and banished to an estate where she would essentially act as a servant to her new stepmother. That is, unless Mary agreed to sign an official title acknowledging her demotion. If Henry couldn't control the sex of his children, he could at least try to control their status. But just like her mother, Mary stuck to her principles and refused. And with each refusal, she received additional punishment.